The barracks of the 122nd Aerial Recon clung stubbornly to a state of perpetual dimness, the lumen strips overhead a sickly, stuttering mockery of light on the vaulted ceiling, barely penetrating the dense, hanging fog of low smoke and greasy machine oil vapors that breathed through the air, settling thick as grime into the cracks of the ferrocrete walls. Beyond iron-shuttered windows, the fortress world of Galar Prime existed beneath its eternal twilight, its polluted sky a roiling cauldron of black storm clouds, punctuated only by the distant, rhythmic flickering of gunfire from the orbital defenses far above. Within the gloom, men and women of the regiment moved with the weary, ingrained precision of long, grinding service, some hunched over battered mess tables, passing tattered regicide cards between gloved hands in silent exchanges. Others lay stretched out upon uncomfortable bunks, boots still stubbornly laced, their minds chasing half-remembered, fragile dreams of distant home worlds slipping further from reach with each passing year, worlds they would almost certainly never lay eyes upon again. Air lay thick and heavy upon them, a visceral tapestry woven from the sense of boiled Sinstark rations, the tang of years-old, unwashed fatigues, and the acrid, ever-present reek of promethium that clung to everything. Seated rigidly on the thin mattress edge of his cot, Trooper Cast worked a slick gray wet stone down the lethal, sleek length of his mono knife. The near monomolecular blade whispered against the fine grit stone, a low, rhythmic rasp in the quiet, drinking the keenness back onto its edge. He moved with slow, deliberate strokes, each one an unthinking ritual engraved into his marrow. His eyes, flat and gray as smoke drifting through a ruin, were fixed unseeingly upon the weapon, but his mind was elsewhere, traversing the overgrown, treacherous paths of memory it always fled to in these quiet, tense moments before action. Cast had drawn his first breath beneath the oppressive, skeletal ashen boughs of Epiria's ancient ironwood forests, a place where natural light was a rare, fleeting guest, and the darkness beneath the canopy was ancient, patient, and undeniably, profoundly hungry. The web of gnarled branches high above wove together so densely that only the thinnest, weary strands of sunlight ever pierced through, casting the tangled undergrowth below into a perpetual, unsettling half-light where shadows stretched unnaturally long, reaching like grasping claws, and the trees themselves seemed to whisper secrets on the shifting breeze with the rustling voices of unseen, lurking things. The air in that clinging forest world was always heavy with the rich scent of damp, decaying earth interlaced with the cold, mineral bite of moss-covered stone. A stagnant atmosphere the wind seldom troubled to breach down to the forest floor, making the world beneath the trees claustrophobically close and profoundly oppressive, a place of breathless, watchful quiet where every single step had to be measured with nerve-wracking care, every movement premeditated a broken twig snapping. A disturbed leaf rustling such small betrayals could mean swift, agonizing death. The great, nameless beasts that stalked the terrifying deep woods were creatures leached from a far older age, nightmares of tough, leathery black hides that drank the light and luminous, poison-green slit-pupil eyes that missed nothing, their breath thick and hot with the unmistakable, coppery reek of blood and decay. They did not hunt like mere animals, they did not roar challenges or give chase in clumsy fury. They were masters of stillness, of the dread pause, creatures that watched and waited with infinite patience from realms even deeper than the shadows, and when they finally struck, they did so in utter, terrifying silence. The only warning was a sudden, suffocating hush, a suspension of sound and motion, a stillness that seeped into the very bark and roots as if the sentient forest itself were holding its collective, ancient breath. Cast had learned this brutal truth impossibly young, that to survive, truly survive in such a predatory cradle, was to become as much a part of it as the trees or the shifting shadows. His father, a hunter of bleaker times before him, had taught him with rough, few words and constant example how to read the subtle language of the woods. The specific panicked shift of birds high in the canopy pinpointing an unseen threat below, the faint, unnerving indent of claws half hidden in wet black soil, the faintest metallic smell of freshly spilled blood caught on a ghost of an air current too subtle for the untuned senses to register. His mother, her grip steady and her eyes sharp as the flints she napped, had taught him the lethal grace of the carved ironwood bow, the delicate, deadly crafting of poisoned barbs, the pervasive, vital art of moving utterly unseen even when he knew, with chilling certainty, something unseen was already watching, its luminous gaze tracking his every desperate step. He had never known, never imagined, another way of life, a world without the ever-present hunger in the deep, watching dark, but the Imperium, that vast, uncaring machine of grinding gears and endless hunger of its own, holds no reverence for the obscure ways of old worlds, no place for secrets carved into wood and whispered on the wind. When the tithe ships came demanding flesh for its wars, the grim men of the Astra Militarum descended upon Epiria like carrion birds scenting a feast, their gunships shredding the thick, perpetual gray cloud blanket that had shrouded the world since time unremembered. They scorned to even attempt marching through the forests in neat, vulnerable ranks as caste's people, in their fearful ignorance, had thought they might. Instead, jagged trails of white-hot phosphorus and liquid promethium fire roared into the gloom, setting the ancient, towering ironwoods ablaze in monstrous, screaming sheets of churning black smoke and tortured, spiraling embers. The great beasts fled deeper into the dwindling wilds, a terror displaced by a greater, colder one, but there was nowhere, truly nowhere, for caste's people to run. Soldiers of the 122nd FN Recon swept through the burning aftermath like grey-clad, grim-faced reapers of a dead harvest, iron-helmed officers barking orders, coldly counting heads, selecting those souls they deemed physically fit for the grinder of perpetual war. Caste had killed the very first man who tried to lay hands on him, his ever-present knife slipping beneath the soldier's flak vest with the same cold, practiced ease it would have gutted a forest hare. The second man clubbed him brutally in the back of the skull with the heavy stock of a las gun with terrifying, practiced efficiency. When consciousness reluctantly returned, dragging him gasping back from the comforting void, his wrists were bound in cold, biting, riveted metal chains. The guard had claimed him, pressed his hard-won survival skills coldly, inexorably into its vast, unheeding war machine, and fed him like grist into the mill of endless, nameless conflicts. Yet some innate things could not be pried loose, could not be erased by Hablock indoctrination or drill sergeant brutality. He had lost his home, irrevocably, consumed by Imperium fire. He had lost his entire people, scattered to the winds or conscripted alongside him. He had lost the cool, protective silence of his beloved ironwood glades, replaced by the ironclad drumbeat of artillery and the screams of the dying. But he had kept his eyes the gray hunter's eyes that saw what others missed. He retained his razor-sharp instincts, honed by terror and necessity. He clung fiercely to his inherited, bone-deep patience, the patience of roots pushing through stone, of shadows waiting for the unwary. Where the other men in his assigned regiment learned to fight with raw imperial fury, with roaring chain-blades and disciplined fusillades, Caste fought like the cornered, silent hunter he was born to be. And the Imperium, pragmatic in its insatiable hunger for carnage, found a brutal, specialized use for such creatures as him. Now they designated him Scout, Pathfinder, Stalker of the Field, names stamped onto his file. The men who had ripped him from his burning forests, who had clubbed him into servitude, now leaned upon his unique, unsettling talents. They looked to him, with hard glances mixing grudging respect and a sliver of cold fear, to guide them through unknown lands choked with ruins and unseen predators, through territory their sanctioned tactics manuals couldn't map. In the firelit, flickering darkness of new alien war zones, soldiers muttered his name when the land around them grew unnaturally quiet, when inexplicable sounds hinted at something unseen moving just beyond the reassuring glow of their lasgun lanterns, something watching, waiting with predatory stillness from the skeletal buildings. Some even whispered prayers for his guidance as much as the Emperor's when the shadows thickened unnaturally long, and the silence stretched unbearably taut as a bowstring about to snap. They followed him then, a congestion of heavy boots treading reluctantly into the unknown darkness behind the man who moved like smoke, the scout who smelled the air differently. You keep sharpening that knife over and over, Caste. You'll wear it down to the stubby, bloody hilt before the week's out, grunted the familiar, rasping voice of Sergeant Drek, roughened by decades of low-grade low-stick smoke and constant, throat-shredding bellowing over the banshee wail of artillery fire. Caste's gray gaze flicked upwards, knife's motion ceasing mid-stroke. Drek's face, a landscape of scar tissue tangled into permanent, weary lines, was set in its usual ambiguous expression, a smirk that didn't quite reach his hard eyes, eternally overlaid with a scowl. His flak armor, scuffed and gouged from decades spent crawling through mud and shrapnel, marked him a man who had been churned through the Imperial Guard meat grinder, long before Caste ever saw the first invaders torch his ironwoods. A miracle he hadn't yet been reduced to unrecognizable pulp for the corpse grinders that powered the very forges forging their next replacements. Caste's tongue, dry as dust, found words barely loud enough to carry over the barracks' low hum. Better a blade sharper than necessary than one grown dull with complacency when the shadows move, Sergeant. His voice held the low timbre of stones grinding together. Drek snorted, drawing deeply on his law stick, the ember flaring briefly. We ain't planning on gutting Groxbeasts when we find him, lad. If it comes to throwing knives instead of lasfire, the mission's already turned into a one-way stroll to the Emperor's side, and we might as well start lighting incense right here. Caste lowered his gaze to the blade again, its edge catching the flickering lumens. He continued the rhythmic slide of stone on steel, slow and deliberate. He offered no argument. It was pointless against such ingrained infantry pragmatism. But deep within, where the old forest lore still whispered, he knew better. In the marginal spaces where war is waged silently, a blade sharp as thought could be the whispered, unseen difference between a kill achieved in utter, tactical silence and a firefight erupting in shrieks and attracting a howling green tide. The silent, chill-filled choice of slipping away unseen into the welcoming darkness, unheard by enemies only a bypassed corner away, instead of choking helplessly on your own bubbling blood, drowning face-down in the sucking crimson mud of some nameless battlefield, your dying scream the only legacy. Across the wide, smoke-hazed expanse of the barracks, a Vox horn abruptly crackled to life, its machine spirit barking incoherently in pained bursts of harsh static before resolving into the unmistakable gravel-strewn intonations of Commissar Varro. 122nd Recon Regiment, stand by for deployment orders. All reconnaissance elements, report to briefing chambers 2 through 5 immediately. Command issues priority red mobilization. Make yourselves ready for war. Imperial lives depend on it. Suffer not the alien to live. The heavy sludge of apathetic waiting that had saturated the barracks cracked apart like rotten ice under sudden pressure. A collective electric tension jolted through the space. The lethargy of mere moments before dissolved instantly into the sharply efficient, well-worn rhythm ingrained into bodies long accustomed to imminent conflict. Cards were abandoned mid-hand on scarred tables, mess kits shoved unceremoniously beneath cots, the clatter of metal and the scrape of benches loud in the sudden shift. A ripple of muttered, worn-thin curses, weary acceptance, woven into ancient imperial blessings, whispered to the cold, faceless emperor above, ran like a cold current through the thick, tension-charged air. Cast's hands moved purely on ingrained instinct. The wet stone vanished into a pouch. The monoknife slid home with a quiet, final click into its worn leather sheath strapped against his ribs. His cameline cloak, woven in shifting, unsettling patterns the color of bruised dusk and ash-blasted stone, hissed as it whispered across his shoulders and clipped high at his throat. He secured his magnoculars with a practiced tug on the strap, settled the weight of his field pack, double-checked the cylindrical shapes of his smoke grenades secure at his belt, each item a specific key coded for survival, each one precisely where it needed to be. Drek sucked the last quick drag from his law stick, the tip flaring angrily bright in the gloom, then exhaled a thick, pungent stream through scarred nostrils before grinding the spent stub to oblivion beneath the heavy heel of his worn boot. The tangled scars on his face seemed to deepen, etching his habitual scowl into a grimace carved in cold dread. Looks like we drew the short straws this rotation, Scout. Let's get about it. Cass simply stood, already shifting internally into the focused, preternaturally quiet, watchful state that always came before the deployment bell tolled. It wasn't anticipation, it was preparation, a deep stillness settling into his bones like old forest snow. He could feel the suffocating weight of the coming deployment pressing in close around him, thick and inescapable as the tangled, smothering canopy of his vanished Empyrean forests. Without uttering a single word in reply to Drek, he stepped smoothly into the flow of grim-faced, hastily equipping troopers, all moving with controlled urgency, toward the chamber where their immediate, likely terminal futures would be inscribed onto tactical slates and offered like sour communion wafers. The crackling, demanding echo of the Vox horns finally faded deathly quiet, leaving behind only the dull, ominous symphony of countless leather, against Plascrete the whisper of boots on stone moving towards duty, underscored by the distant, ceaseless, mechanical churn of the fortress's vast ventilation stacks, heaving out poisoned air high above Galler Prime's pall. The very character of the air within the barracks transmuted organically in those moments following the Commissar's Gravelton decree. The stale miasma of smoke and sweat curdled into something sharper, metallic, the thick, electric tang of heavy, barren tension, pressing down with physical weight upon the massing troopers, compressing idle, fatigue-born chatter into sharp, efficient actions devoid of unnecessary noise. Soldiers cinched flak vest buckles tight with quick, jerky movements born of long muscle memory. Fingers automatically checked weapon power packs and slide charges with tactile familiarity. Lips moved silently or near silently, forming half-remembered, desperate prayers to the uncaring God Emperor ruling distantly over Terra. Cast rose soundlessly, already seeing the distressing familiarity in the patterns unfolding around him, the awful, dread-filled quiet before the inevitable storm breaches the horizon, the subtle but universal shift in posture and movement of men on the precipice of battle when they sense its predatory arrival echoing towards them, but haven't yet faced its brutal gaze directly across a smoking, corpse-strewn field. Sergeant Drek exhaled the last lungful of low smoke laced with resignation, then ground the spent stub into the ferrocrete beneath his ingrained boothiel with brief, frustrated savagery. The scarred angled lines framing his weary face etched themselves deeper still into a hostile map of displeasure as his permanent scowl intensified. The throne take this rotten duty. Come on then, cast, he gritted out, the words tasting of ash, quick sharp. Let's march down and see what particular flavor of fresh, brutal hell command is gracious enough to cook up and serve on our plates this blasted rotation. Together, wordless in shared understanding, they merged into the purposeful but oddly funereal flow of Aryan troopers like steel filings drawn towards a magnet, filtering through the gloom of their stark living quarters into the vast, echoing immensity of the fortress halls beyond, the way ahead lit only by lights that seemed to flicker more mournfully than before. The assigned briefing chamber itself was a brutalistic monument built for war, cavernous and cathedral-like in its cold emptiness, dominated by rearing vaulted ceilings built from featureless, unforgiving slabs of grim black ferrocrete. The walls were crowded with weathered battle standards, ancient banners whose once-vibrant sigils were now ghostly impressions, faded by relentless time and layers of suffocating campaign ash. Tack display screens flickered intermittently in the gloom, a constellation of cold, soulless blue light that cast stark relief upon the assembly of officers and waiting reconnaissance scouts gathered below, their faces catching the glow like eerie, distorted masks. Cast instinctively drifted towards the back-shadowed perimeter where observation felt natural, a ghost against the walls, while jangling senior officers took their appointed positions at the burl-plated head of the chamber. Beneath the immense, looming imperial aquila wrought in tarnished brass and brutal steel that spanned half the ceiling, carved as if eternally poised to strike downward, stood Colonel Vorin, his presence radiating an aura of cold, unbreakable iron will and ramrod discipline. His red-trimmed greatcoat fell heavily upon his broad, due-to-stiffened shoulders, amplifying his stature, and the red-lit cybernetic lens where his left eye should have been clicked and refocused constantly, with an unnerving, mechanical whir, as it methodically scanned the assembled men arrayed before him like tools awaiting deployment schedules. Beside him, an implacable figure as rigid and seemingly carved from the same jet material as gallows themselves, stood the black-lead dagger of Imperial Will, Commissar Varro, his cap pulled low, face expressionless as a tombstone. The vast room plunged instantly into an anticipatory silence, punctuated only by nervous shuffles and that constant monotonous clicking of Vorin's optical implant, thick enough to press upon their eardrums. When the colonel finally spoke, his voice resonated with the heavy, unstoppable force of a distant avalanche heard growing steadily louder. The mining colony designated Gamma Primus Secundus, Grimhold's Rift surveyed Zone Delta. He paused, the tactical plate swirling before him reflecting crimson digital trails on his impassive features. Contact was lost to Command 4-3 standard hours ago. Silence deepened, almost physical now. Greenskin Xenos filth, Vorin continued, the revulsion raw in his tone, flooded out of the equatorial agruasts without warning. Intelligence tracking lagged, denied detection protocols employed. New source infiltration window, irrelevant. A hollow, crackling hololith map burst instantly to agitated life at the center of the high-ceiling chamber, spinning momentarily before stabilizing. A twisted, tortured landscape unfolded, a hellish vista of shattered mountains pitched at impossible angles, sheer cliffs tumbling into deep ravines, the land itself a chaotic sea of crumbling mineshafts and sheer drop-offs that seemed to yawn towards some subterranean hellscape, lit only sporadically by the flickering, lonely lights of isolated automated mining outposts precariously clinging to existence. Even rendered in the grainy, impermanent gloom of the projection, C could immediately sense the profound hostility of the terrain. The ground was scarred, sliced open by centuries of deep drilling and relentless, shallow excavation. A fractured, broken landscape of unstable peaks and lethal drops carved by immense mechanical indifference from the world's dying husk. Its apocalypse had been written into existence one minecart load of ore at a time. And now Vorin's specter scowl deepened visibly, bracketed by the firmest press of his lips. The greenskins have solidified their infestation. Reports from now silent vox posts indicate initial waves overwhelmed outer habs, collapsed defenses. He gestured curtly towards the holomap where the primary access points flared bloody red. The main road arteries are closed. Heavy fortifications confirmed. Automated gun nests retrofitted to fire crude projectiles, salvaged colony defenses, packed rockcrete barricades, reinforced with scrap metal layers 20 digits thick across all choke points. A fortified kill zone suspended within that larger inhospitable mess. A grim realization settled like ash into the chamber. Frontal engagement wasn't just deadly, it was suicide on an industrial scale masquerading as strategy. Cast registered it instantly, chillingly confirming his prediction formed moments earlier in the fetid air of his cubicle. Before the regiment's main mass could grind itself into oblivion advancing down hellish prepared paths, the approach needed to be found elsewhere. The ghosts would be sent ahead through the darkness, lost lives seeding survival paths for the greater mass as ever. Ven's bionic eye flashed with a sharp ruby flare as he pivoted slightly, removing gauntlets, his gaze sweeping with slow, deliberate weight over the loose assembly of reconnaissance soldiers standing near the rear of the regiment's requisite shadows, the wraiths who moved unseen while others rested, who traversed contested zone terrain the guardsmen prayed they wouldn't encounter. Therefore, Vorin continued, hammering down the sentence like a coffin nail deep into Durawood. Initial main assault contingent deployment delayed to ascertain viable covert approach vector. Reconnaissance elements report deploy priority major-level tactical survey recon. He singled them merely by the stare of his optical lens. Task proceeds main mobilization tick stream. Ghost team's insertion authorized dark zone beta clearance holds. His gaze swept over them again. Your task is singular locate and secure at least one viable ingress point through terrain designated level hazard tau. Data slates indicate collapsed tunnels, compromised structural nanocarbanoid, supports risks prevalent, unstable rock formations, geological sensors offline or disrupted, extensive network of ancient minshafts, partially mapped prone to sudden shift or sink activity. Ven paused only a moment to allow this hellish terrain assessment to sink in. Intelligence predicts the enemy understands this labyrinth advantages terrain passivity as their defense shield, likely same utilizing ambush positions previously, cleared mining network access rationals. Expect ambush density ratings significantly high. Expect brutal savagery, significantly elevated resistance indexes verified orcoid toughness standard. He paused, letting that sink in like chemrin into parched soil. You will however proceed regardless preliminary mission status viability, status aux sigma transmitted ground zero. Imperative sub-objective stalled en masse vehicle embar, or dismounted foot movement into enemy, prepared ambush terrain defensive emplacements guarantees immediate catastrophic troop, loss percentage projections, over 74.8 within primary engagement phase first 20 minutes. He paused only a millisecond, his left orbital lens whirring faintly while maintaining its redlit stare. You shall infiltrate preliminary staging zone, because if your units fail comprehensively in this preceding mission parameter identification subsection criteria, his remaining organic eye locked solidly into a merciless glare. This regiment walks uninformed, deliberately directed, blinder than ash-blizzarded optics, directly pathways rated lethal. Categorically equivalent tactical suicide option enacted command level, a blind advance, into predetermined, tactically indefensible slaughter. Imperium permits only victory achieved through absolute cost efficiency. His stare burned upon them, ghosts destined to save the soldiers who despised ghosts. Comprehension, cold as ice, ran through the muted soldiers gathered. Scattered low, unintelligible mutters ran under the collective breath, identifiable sounds only as the rasping slide of worn leather on weapon grips being readjusted quietly, the tightening of buckles on already secured gear not needing it, orders recounted beneath muffled breaths. Cast readied his own lean frame subtly against the damp wall behind him, his jaw clamped tight until tendons stood proud against his skin like cables. Always the same brutal equation. Scouts went in first, the first feet on hostile soil, the first eyes scouting avenues of death, the first trigger finger pulled screaming silent in a target. Statistically speaking, definitively the first names struck forever from the active duty roster by choked Vox report back to base within 40 minutes flat. They were simply knowable, quantifiable attrition curve entries that command factored into every per-battle equation. Sacrifices laid down upon an altar of victory calculations. A sacrifice they stood representing in this gray light. Ven's optical implant whirred and wordlessly refocused onto the deployment chronometer near a tactical summary slate projected upon his podium console. He concluded, scheduled planetfallen class Vengeance pattern dropship's coordinates logged your slates, initiate 6 hours and counting minus 30 seconds duration T, 07, 59, 30. Execute preparation directives immediately upon dismissal. Further mission packs hardened encrypted rooted encryption channels beta 6ed out per standard recon protocols section 34 subsection 9.0. Vorin restrapped gloves with crisp precision. Signal finished. Disperse dismissed effective now. The formal words echoed flat in the stark chamber. There is no room for honor ceremony here. No speeches bettering grisly fate here. No time for reflection even wasted upon drop duty. Movement erupted instantly. Boots shuffled heavily towards exits. Cast did not linger to exchange pointless words of luck or exchanged grim despair with others. He slipped soundlessly, a wraith seeping into the deeper shadows near the chamber's farthest side entrance, disappearing into a waiting service corridor lined with flickering, unreliable lumen strips throwing weak, uneven islands of pale light upon the damp slickness weeping from ferrocrete walls breathing faint guilt. He required no wasted discourse concerning what awaited them all here. None who listened to Vorin could mistake it. Wordless efficiency now alone remained meaningful currency compared to rhetoric hollowed out to dry sinews on bone in butchering calculation tables. 6 hours until violent kinetic descent forces slammed shaking hulls down into dust-choked surface. 6 hours produce movement ghost patterns through figments before the inevitable deadly hunt commenced its silent, wading stride towards the cavernous bowels of a world already discarded and left barren by uncaring hands. The briefing had explicitly transferred purpose. Grimhold's Rift Survey Point Delta was comprehensively Dinga-forgotten mining colony, perched precariously on the edge of an ash-choked world already systematically gutted like a corpse. Its few operational tunnels mere probing fingers running deep into the weakened planet's cancerous, blackened crust, draining out the last DRGS of critical minerals the ceaselessly hungry Imperium calculated could yet be squeezed from its poisoned husk. Just enough value remained still justify sacrificing, yet more regiments to claw it briefly back. The drift settled round cast like a mantle, wrapped against glaring viewscreen light outlining contours of death ahead, 6 hours counting. He entered the corridor louder only than its own sigh amid structural function. The hunt indeed approaches. The camp hadn't truly slept, not with the heavy, earthy scent of fresh-turned soil from collapsed tunnels hanging thick in the ventilation shafts, but the eruption of the dawn attack siren tore through the barracks hall like a physical blow, a wailing, mechanical dirge that resonated in the teeth and bones of every man of the 122nd Epen Recon. Cast felt it vibrate through the cot beneath him, a final punctuation to the endless beat of war drums only he'd been hearing since the first rumor of Grimhold's fall. He didn't flinch. His hands, grimed with ancient, embedded lubricants and the dust of 100 deployments, continued their ritual without pause. Without his tools, it wasn't a question of courage. He was simply undressed for the day, naked prey waiting for the predators. He was already dead. The chainlialing cloak came first. He lifted it from its worn canvas roll, its fabric unnervingly cool and fluid beneath his calloused fingers. Like pooled shadow and dirty water meeting, it slithered over his hands and arms. In the dim, grudging light filtering through the high, grimy viewports of the bunkroom, it rippled uneasily, shifting through muted grays and dirty browns, blurring its edges against the soot-stained ferrocrete wall behind him. It was a veil woven from captured darkness and grime, its mimic fibers drinking in the ambient gloom, the shadows of stacked gear, the texture of the rough-hewn rock floor, promising to erase him, stone by stone. He ran a scarred knuckle along a familiar, clumsily stitched tear near the hood's edge, a mark where something with poor eyesight but good reach had almost found purchase on Bassac Ridge. Junk in commissar reports, necessary lifeblood in casts. Next, from its unadorned polymer sheath embedded into his thigh plate, the monoknife. He drew the blade with a soft, breath-like hiss. The blackened steel felt cold and dense in his palm, absorbing the weak lumens instead of reflecting them. Only along the cruel, essential apex did a hairline fracture of light live, the edge ground so impossibly fine it existed on the threshold between material, more a concept of separation than steel. A blade meant for the quiet work, the work that ended before the echo began. He tested its balance, a featherweight ghost rolling across his knuckles, a whisper of terrible promise against the rhythmic shriek of the alarm. Then it vanished back into its sheath, a piece of potential violence stowed away until required. The magnoculars were next. Scuffed brass casing gleamed dully as he lifted them, catching the sickly yellow emergency lumen set high overhead in its rusted cage. Not just for reaching out across rocky wastes, these lenses could peel back layers of deception. They saw the telltale pulse of body heat bleeding through solid rock, could pick a sniper's careful outline from the abstract void of deep night, could cut through the swirling, blinding madness of chemdispersal fields and pyroclastic clouds like slag-stained glass. He lifted the heavy brass tubes to his face, the cool rims pressing familiarly against his temples. A twist of knurled dials and the blurred shapes of hurried troopers securing gear resolved into painfully sharp detail, revealing sweat-slicked brows, lips moving in urgent, silent curses, the stark hollows of fear in young eyes. A perspective gained, a clarity imposed upon the chaotic scramble. Focus sharpened anxiety. Finally, the smoke grenades. 4 thick cylinders, cool ceramic exteriors giving way to industrial-grade metalloids strapped low on his webbing belt, positioned for instinctive, desperate grabs. Worn leather loops held them snug against the leather, polished smooth by years of clammy palms and frantic searches amid artillery barrages. Old, yes, but reliable. Each one held a violent, chaotic storm. Pull the pin, feel the ignition charge thump against your hip, and within a heartbeat, choking oblivion billowed forth a thick teeming cloud capable of swallowing the midday sun, of giving a running man, even a crawling man, the ghost of a chance to vanish. The hollow rasp of a poorly filtered breath caught nearby pulled his gaze. Younger recruits, faces pale despite ingrained grime under the harsh lights. Cass secured the final strap. Smoke offered choice, escape, concealment, momentary pause. Or final vengeance before oblivion settled. The troopers of the 122nd rose as one organism, a single creature of war shaking off enforced stillness. Harness buckles snapped shut with sharp metallic cracks, lasguns slammed into mag clips with dull, meaty thuds, helmets descended onto heads grown weary beneath their weight. The frigid air curdled instantly with heat and exertion, saturated with the ripe aroma of unwashed fatigues, the bite of polished metal freezing enough to taste, the iron tang of ancient, leached rock oozing moisture unseen. Boots found Ferrocrete in a unified, shuddering rhythm, a relentless drumbeat marching time into oblivion, each step echoing with finality in the cavernous hall as the regiment funneled towards their iron wombs. The Gorgon assault carrier dominated the staging ground. Less a vehicle, more a fortress pried from bedrock and hideously animated. Its colossal riveted flanks bore the scabbard-over wounds of 1,000 hotspots, the pitting of shrapnel scars mingling with the dull charcoal smears of countless engine fires ignored until extinguished. It was a brutal, ugly testament to pragmatic butchery, form completely subsumed to function, designed for war, for delivery, for the efficient swallowing of gristle and bone. Mud, thick and viscous, clung to its immense treads in clotting layers, stark brown streaked through with maroon that dried almost black. Its rear maw gaped open, a slavering jaw awaiting sacrifice. One after another, platoons vanished into its cavernous metal gullet. Cast clambered in after his squad, finding a narrow scrap of space on a scratched, bare alloy bench, pressed shoulder-tosheter, knee into men sweating desperation. The deck plates throbbed violently beneath his boots, vibrated by primeval engine rhythms, and the deep bass snarl of a machine challenged by gravity. The air within was a choking miasma, the burnt kerosene reek of ancient lubricants boiling away on hot surfaces, the hot stench of confined human bodies long deprived of sanitation, the faint metallic taste of panic fermenting in dozens of throats. Opposite Cast, Corporal Venn shifted his considerable weight, the scarred leather of his armored jerkin creaking. Half his face was cold, unyielding, sculpted plasteel and wire, plates overlapping like insected carapace. His remaining organic eye, sunken deep in a nest of scar tissue, reflected the dim red emergency lights pulsing unevenly above, while the bionic replacement burned a low, dull crimson, a slit of hellfire simmering in the gloom. Venn spat a stream of viscous, rust-colored fluid onto the oily deck. Orcs, he rasped, the sound grating like sand on steel underground. A slow, deliberate shake of his ruined head, a deep grinding against his collar. You ever gone toe-to-toe with the green filth in a mine shaft before? Scout, Cast met that crimson glow briefly. He shook his own head, then a cold smile touched his lips, devoid of any warmth or levity. Special kind of hell, Cast murmured, his voice low against the engine's growl. No room to run, nowheres to flee. No sky above to remind you of air that ain't thick with sweat, piss, and rot. Just featureless black rock all around, squeezing you tight. Then you hear 'em. First like echoes, right? Like rocks falling in the deeper black. Then that hooting and hollering gets real close. Bang in their axes on the rock walls. Clatter in armor. Snap in teeth. Common for you out of every damn hole in the stone. Seeping out the walls, trickle becomes a flood. Someone further down the cramped row mumbled the litany of protection against Xeno's abominations. The words were swallowed, rendered near inaudible, as the Gorgon's massive engines roared into agonized life, transforming the deep thrum through Cast's boots into a bone-jarring, skull-rattling fury. Entire bulkheads heaved in a violent spasm. Molten heat pulsed from grills overhead, weeping condensation that scalded invisible paths down greasy armor plates. Air curdled instantly, thick enough to choke on, stale with recycled fumes from filtration units saturated beyond their limit. Poison brewing. Beside Cast, Drek tugged at the strap securing his belt-loaded lascutter, the heavy weapon slung awkwardly against bent knees. Juice another day, right? He exhaled, the words flat, forced. A statement expecting no agreement, offering no comfort. His knuckles, white on the weapon, betrayed the fiction. Cast remained silent, his attention turned inward. The deck lurched violently, a final sickening shrug, and the Gorgon began its ponderous crawl. Enormous treads screamed and slipped on slick permacrete before crunching biting chunks out of older, harder stone, grinding over slag heaps and foundations of long-abandoned futures. It carried its cargo of resigned fate towards the landing fields of Grimhold's Rift, a place where only the desperate sought purchase. Hours leaked away inside the armored tomb. The Gorgon's treads now found brutal purchase, crushing the war-churned rubble surrounding the shattered colony. Inside the troop compartment, the pulsing red emergency lights created a drowning effect, staining everything the color of clotted blood below a film of perpetual dust. The glow flickered erratically across blast-scorched walls, adorned with hastily carved aquilas and names scratched beside allocated floor spaces, prayers etched into the metal, litanies from men whose skulls likely decorated some greenskin chieftain's temple by now. The air had congealed, a a sweaty, suffocating fog condensed under the ceiling of riveted steel, trapping the exhaled terrors of dozens of men, settling onto their tongues as a coppery fear, and coating their throats in cloying, oil-soaked heat. Near the heavy armored partition separating this hell from the driver's blister, Colonel Tarn's low, clipped tones managed to carve through the engine noise. That voice too calm, too precise, measured. Cass knew that voice. It was the sound of command indifference, the voice of a man already counting assets deployed versus assets likely recoverable, a ledger keeper for the grim arithmetic of war, the tone of expectation, the expectation of death, planned for, accounted for, already etched onto his mental scrolls. Men snapped to wakefulness, snapping away stunned reverie or horror. Across the narrow central aisle from Cast, a boy dragged fresh from a manufactorum littered with Imperial recruiters' forms, his uniform still bearing the stiff creases of honesty. 16 summers, maybe, hunched forward, spine bowed as if carrying the weight of the sky, his frantic fingers traced endless, useless arcs along the worn leather strap of his lasgun. Another recruit nearby, maybe 18, flushed cheeks still holding youthful contours beneath the grime, lips moved frantically, voicing a half-forgot catechism against the horror, eyes squeezed tightly shut. Others simply stared upwards at the riveted overhead, expressions stark masks frozen somewhere beyond terror and resignation, searching the steel voids for messages, for answers, for perhaps the distant, comforting gaze of the distant, uncaring emperor. Cast ignored the quiet prayers scrabbling at the walls. His fingers unrolled a familiar sheet of battered synth parchment, the tattered edge digging into his thumb after years of folding. The map summoned the spirit of the place they approached, Grimhold's Rift. His gloved finger traced barely visible lines etched into the grainy topography, a landscape already stained with planning markers and imagined obstacles. Habitation blocks appeared like offerings toppled pillars, stacked in crumbling disarray. Slag pits were cruel, blackened wounds gouged into the earth's flesh. The mine shafts, thin, treacherous capillaries spiderwebbing down into complete, impenetrable blackness. Overlaid faintly in blue cogitator print, the anticipated patterns of the planetary dust storms pulsed like diseased arteries vast, chaotic swirls promising whole sections gone blind, swallowed whole by walls of moving, redressed particulate. Cass tapped the map deliberately, a chipped finger partway along a jagged ridgeline on the western edge, drawing Sergeant Dreck's bleary, bloodshot gaze. Dreck leaned closer, the harsh grind of 3-day stubble grating audibly against the webbing wrapping his neck guard as he followed Cast's gesture. "Use this," Cast murmured barely above the engine's gaseous belch. Dreck's eyes narrowed slightly, beneath the thick scars permanently knitted across his brow, squinting at the frantic swirling patterns. The storms. He asked, voice rumbled like unstable rock deep underground. Cast offered a grim nod, his gaze still fixed upon the perilous dance mapped out on worn synth parchment. "Orcs," he stated flatly. "They fight like a closed fist smashing bedrock. Loud, brutal, direct, but they don't see so good. Their greenskin eyes ain't built for shifting ground, not like ours with the lenses fine-tuned. They get confused in the swirl, blinded by grit, if we move with the dust fronts. Ride the red clouds like shadows ride moonlight. It might just be enough cover to slip behind them, way behind, before even the sporsniffers start baying." Dreck remained silent for a long moment, studying the map intently, a vein pulsing beside his temple, calculating risks versus potential annihilation. Risky, the word carried the weight of gravel settling. Miscalculate that storm front just once, lose its rhythm, we become blind as the orcs. Worse, blind and exposed. Straight into a greenskin welcoming party that'll make a banquet out of us. Cast exhaled slowly, warm breath instantly thickening the air before his visor. His gloved fingers shifted, tapping the ruined habitation blocks clustered precariously near the colony's shattered western entrance, barely visible on an elevated plateau amid swirling storm projections. "That's why," he pressed, locking eyes with Dreck across the map. "High ground grabs first. Washed away, half-collapsed, poison zone. Doesn't matter so much, the spires, they give the sight. The view controls the field. Let me and the others get out there first. Give the main lines a reliable report before they walk right into that dust-blown charnel house blindfolded." Dreck stared hard at the scout, then slowly, heavily gave a curt, decisive nod. "Always had a mind for beating the odds, Cast, but listen now, use that mind right, understand? Not like Malkev, not like that eager fool Tourish last month. Scouts die swiftly, too swiftly. Die first, every blessed time, especially the clever ones, the gifted ones, the ones who figure the angles a little too sharply. The enemy largely notices those men quickest, mostly notices when they stop breathing." He lowered his bulk back onto the protesting bench strut. The unspoken weight of experience hung heavier than any kit. Cast held Dreck's gaze, not needing to speak agreement. He carried the names Drek invoked as vividly as he carried his blade Malkev vaporized cornering into likely ambush he predicted, but orders dismissed. Turish, a gifted scout and astronavigator, seconded to recon duty, leading patrol who met a choppa blade carving runes into his helmetless head after a too clever flank in the sulfur pits. Their insignia still chipped ghosts caught inside his sightless case. Not forgotten. Never enough caution. Never. A sudden, harsh burst of static lashed through the overhead voxgrill, preceding the transmission. A voice-whipped wire taut, frayed down to brittle edges by exhaustion and static. Attention all units. Sensorium sweeps indicate abnormal orc movement patterns detected encircling objective area central sectors. Repeat, abnormal movement signatures across secondary ruins and adjoining minehead zones. Visual confirmation remains nil. Repeat, nil visual verification recorded. Signals 2 degraded by atmospheric interference. Potentially local warbands maneuvering to form new harassment fronts, or potentially emerging filth spawn from collapsed northern deep sump depots. Scouts' primary formations will deploy advance immediately upon zone entry to ascertain causational factors. Assess behavioral shift. Expect, anticipate, prepare for immediate active hostilities. Stand ready beyond designated extract vectors. The tiny, cheap voice fell silent, swallowed again by the grinding roar. Silence, thick and sudden as packed snow, crammed into the stifling compartment. No shouts, no screams of panic, yet the air shifted. Electricity crackled unseen. Shoulders stiffened under webbing straps pulled suddenly tight enough to creak stressed buckles. Knuckles holding lascan grips tensed, etching white pressure circles into black lacquered wood. Fingers drifted far more swiftly than before towards trigger guards still reflecting the flickering crimson gloom. Necks corded with tendons suddenly taut, and eyes ceased frantic searches and snapping instantly, irrevocably, towards the massive, sealed plasteel ramp dominating the rear bulkhead. That ramp lead outward. To the hunt, hinted the sergeant. To death, suggested the savage rattle of the deck plates beneath them. Cass smoothly rolled his worn map, binding it securely beneath his hip webbing. Long before its hiss began, he felt the Gorgon's descent beginning, a subtle shift in the engine's tenor. Time ceased. The Gorgon didn't settle, it crashed. Armored treads impacting ruined permacrete with the apocalyptic force of a meteor tearing open the earth. The entire steel mountain heaved violently. Lascan and barrels rattled violently in their shoulder racks like the teeth of the condemned. Loose fittings and ancient dust rained from conduit pipes overhead, a fine gray silt fogging the crimson light. Bodies instinctively braced against restraints, necks snapping back, spines compressing against unforgiving alloy. The inertial shockwave passed. Then, cutting through the ringing in the ears, the unmistakable whine as powerful servomotors inside the hydraulics bucked enormous strain pyres, depressurizing valves shrieking like tortured beasts. Heavy metallic boots slammed violently back down onto deck plates. Chains locking the frontal ramp disengaged with a series of echoing metallic cracks that echoed like starter pistols through the cavernous interior, and then destroying all hearing. The immense ramp counterweight slammed down onto the waiting earth outside with an explosion of tortured metal, clanging like the gates to damnation collapsing open. The waiting was over. Hell invited them in. A sudden, kiln-hot gust blasted through the gaping opening, a cyclone roaring straight from the forge of annihilation. It howled down the troop compartment's throat, a furnace blast tasting sharply of ozone fried violently off crumbling plasma coils, the reek of melted ceramite and warping armor plate, the sickening petroleum reek of promethium spills burning without emission, mixed with something infinitely fouler, fungal. Heavy spores with spores like rotted mushrooms crushed weeks ago underfoot, until the putrid pulp filled nostrils persistently, decaying vegetable matter stewing under swamp water heat, sewage amplified tenfold beneath equatorial jungle heat. The choking scent of unwashed orcish malignancy, condensed into a single, almost visible taste. Beyond the Gorgon's maw, the battlefield sprawled as if punched directly from Terra's forgotten nightmares. It wasn't a ruin, it was the cadaver of a civilization viciously butchered and left baking under an angry sky choked with mourners' ashes. Grimhold's Rift, once a humming artery pumping industrial might, veins filled with ore and slag, lungs breathing hot furnace air, feeding the miserable gerodor of imperial conflict elsewhere. Now, corpseified. Vast bones of shattered machinery pierced the low-hanging canopy of smoke and swirling ash. Monolithic chimneys lay amputated, snapped like skeletal fingers clawing blindly at the toxic dusk-stained sky that pulsed with dim, bruised ochre light. Factories as vast as cathedrals stood hollowed out, steel endoskeletons forced apart like tortured ribcages. Towers twisted by impossible heat stood as petrified victims of Unque, the refinery's rusted roof groaned beneath their weight, an ancient complaint echoing through decayed girders as the structure settled, protesting the sudden intrusion. Cast reached the apex, the highest shattered plate, and dropped into a low crouch, scanning back into the swirling murk below. His scouts flowed into position beside him, silent as ghosts settling onto a grave, lining the corroded ledge. He lowered his magnoculars, the rough composite casing cold against his cheekbone, and swept his gaze across the twisting, smoke-choked hellscape that was Grimhold below. The ruins sprawled like the broken skeleton of a colossal beast, shrouded in drifting ash and chem fumes that stung the eyes even from this height. And then, movement or rather, half-perceived flickers within the gloom. Shadows writhed deeper within the rubble field, beyond a collapsed hablock. Hulking forms shifted against a backdrop of jagged concrete and twisted rebar, their outlines indistinct shapes in the pervasive half-light. They moved with an unnerving silence completely alien to the expected orcish clamor, creeping forward not with a bellowing charge but a predator's stalking advance. Massive frames hunched low, minimizing their silhouettes against the debris, crude weapons catching dull glimmers in the failing, ash-dimmed twilight haze. Orcs, but not a raging mob, not the howling, berserk horde Imperial troopers braced for. These were different, stormboys, trained for the swift, brutal efficiency of raids and ambushes. Their ironclad boots scraped leathersoft against broken rockcrete with uncanny finesse, jetpacks strapped secure to broad backs like grimy beetles, pilot lights flickering orange points in the perpetual wind. Cast counted swiftly, assessing outlines coalescing out of the murk. 12, maybe 15 greenskins, more than enough to overrun and butcher the exposed soldiers hauling salvage below like exposed grubs. He exhaled a slow, deliberate hiss between his teeth, emptying his lungs against the coiled tension gathering in his gut. Then the signal, a closed fist raised high, knuckles white, before snapping his fingers open twice. Sharp, precise, carrying a clear urgency on the thin air. Ambush. Enemy inbound. Prepare counterattack. Below, deep within the rubble field, where dust lay thick as snow, the soldiers reacted not with the frantic scramble of startled prey, but the cool, ingrained discipline of seasoned veterans. Feet subtly adjusted their footing on loose scree, torsos angled fractionally away from the anticipated assault path, weapons tracking along sightlines suddenly made lethal. There was no sudden giveaway. Instead, they bled away from clustered vulnerability, melting behind the scant cover of buckled plasteel plates, engine blocks, and the skeletal remains of earlier burnt-out vehicles, becoming harder targets in the ruins' embrace. The Stormboys closed the distance, oblivious, brutish hands tightening knuckle height on axe hafts and the crude snouts of their slug-throwers. Squat, powerfully built forms coiled low, muscles bunching beneath thick green hide like predatory apes preparing to spring upon unsuspecting quarry. Cast let them come. He watched as still as the ferrocrete beneath him, his breath shallow and controlled, just as he had waited countless times amidst the vine-choked darkness of Aperia's deep woods, where shadows themselves seemed to harbor teeth, where the great forest beasts moved unseen until their claws were already in motion. Then when the lead Stormboy's iron-soled boot crunched down on a shard of plasteel, less than 30 meters from the nearest hidden guardsman, when the sour reek of their unwashed bodies was close enough to catch on the wind, Cast raised his last pistol in a single fluid motion and fired the first shot. The lash of red light cut the gloom, silent save for the searing crackle of ionized air. It struck true, punching through the temple of the lead orc with terminal precision. The creature's thick green skull split like rancid fruit, gore painting the dust behind it, a shocking crimson before momentum sent the slumped carcass tumbling headlong into the debris. For a fractured half-second, the Stormboys froze, dumbfounded by the sudden, brutal death of their forward scout. Then the Imperial ambush exploded. The ruins ignited with strobing quantum lightning. Soldiers unleashed disciplined fire from hidden angles, lasguns snapping out crimson beams that hissed through the swirling dust, punching into thick green hides with precise savagery. Some shots punched through scrap armor, others seared into naked flesh, raising gouts of acrid steam. Caught flat-footed, some orcs bellowed their rage, their crude slug-throwers answering with ear-splitting thunderclaps that rent the air, sending shrapnel screaming off buckled stones and shattered machinery, kicking up vicious dust devil sprays. Others ignored the wickering last-bolts and ignited their jetpacks, the primitive thrusters screaming like damned souls as they lumbered uncertainly into the gritty air. One, larger than the others, his crude armor adorned with jagged metal teeth, managed a clumsy arc, the bass roar of his pack vibrating the rockcrete itself, and slammed down hard, blades high, directly atop a huddled guardsman near a wrecked chimera. The trooper looked up, eyes wide beneath his helmet rim, just as the crude cleaver, stained brown with ancient gore, began its howling descent. Cast was faster. He threw himself from the refinery's ledge with the silent desperation of a raptor diving. He hit the greenskin's broad back like a striking viper, the impact jarring through his own frame, driving the sharpened monomolecular edge of his combat knife deep into the thick, corded muscle bunched between the orc's hunched shoulders. The beast roared, a deafening sound of pain and fury, the descending cleaver jarring sideways as its body twisted violently, biting deep into the flak armor over the prone guardsman's ribs instead of cleaving bone. Cast felt jarred teeth, smelled sour sweat and filth from scales away. He wrenched the knife free with a wet sucking sound, spattering his armor with dark ichor, and struck again, instantly, viciously, aiming for the vulnerable juncture at the monstrous skull's broad base. The blade sank deep into gristle and spinal column. The orc shuddered violently, jerked, spun a quarter turn with surprising quickness, its enormous, tusk-ringed maw gaping as it gurgled some guttural curse that sounded like rocks in a grinder, then simply collapsed forward upon the stunned soldier, a broken mountain of dead flesh. The soldier scrambled free as Cass stood on the reeking backplate, wrenching his stained blade out with the wet pop of separating sinews. The fight was brutal, saturated with the shriek of lasbolts, the thunder of orc munitions, the meaty impacts and wet cries. But it was devastatingly, efficiently short. The Stormboys had expected panicked flesh, an easy slaughter of disjointed humans caught hauling scrap. Instead, they received focused, lethal fire from hardened killers lying in wait. They were butchered within minutes. The last bulky green form spasmed, dropping to its knees amidst the crackling stink of superheated metal and spilled ichor, its crude rivet shooter slipping from lax fingers to clatter on the slag-strewn ground. Cast exhaled, a slow, methodical push of air against the coppery tang of blood and scorched ozone filling his nose. His breath, despite the exertion, felt unnervingly steady. He wiped his monoknife clean against the thick hide of the corpse still warm at his feet, the gesture carrying no malice, only necessity. Then he lifted his gaze, eyes narrowing against the billowing curtains of ash drifting toward the distant, jagged horizon, where the immense, bloated bulk of the ruined colony stretched like the corpse of a gutted leviathan. This skirmish was just the overture, a single, bloody note struck in the settling dust. Beyond the tired eyes of his small squad, beyond the clutch of survivors huddled near the pitifully meager haul of salvage, lay the vast, consuming expanse of the true battlefield. The Emperor's work here had barely begun. His path lay outward, into the howling absence of Imperial light. Cast signaled to his chosen scouts, a gesture sharp and economical. 5 figures detached from the main group, seasoned kill teams melting from cover like phantoms. These were not ordinary soldiers. They moved with the predatory stillness born of countless dark missions beyond the wire. 3 men, 2 women, faces hidden behind camouflage beneath helmets, bodies lean and hard beneath battle-stained gear, each bearing the subtle mapwork of scars, unmistakable insignia of cavernous void ships and trench lines deep in forgotten sectors. These were veterans forged in skepticism, survivors who learned in choked ashlanes and alien jungles that clever silence, not brute strength, kept the weaklings alive longer. Their strength lay hidden, coiled within the quiet certainty of their movements, weapons held ready but unobtrusive in gauntleted hands, lasguns slung muzzle down, straps secured tight against chest plates meticulously dulled to matte non-reflection. The cracked spine of the urban corpse spread before them now, swallowing the small silhouette of his team. They merged seamlessly into the monumental rubble field, a nightmarish labyrinth of toppled habitation blocks, each colossal structure resembling broken teeth against the lowering dirty sky, jagged avenues choked with collapsed masonry, shattered rockcrete roadways petering into utter wastelands, and the rusting, angular tombs of Amble-class transports or Lemon Russ hulks, their Onsibrite Imperial Aquila insignia now scarred, blackened ghosts on eaten-away armor plates. This wreckage had pulsed once with human density, street markets and promenades and industrial clamor. Now it belonged exclusively to desolation. Occasionally, minimalist white armor emblems shimmered from beneath dust drifts, guardsmen's skulls. Nearby, perhaps jutting from flipped slabs, the thicker, rust-spurting carcasses of orcs lay partially buried, their crude bioweaponry fused dark rust, patterns coalescing and breaking apart in the shifting, acidic breeze. Gutted skeleton frames of tracked vehicles slumped in the wreckage like beached whales, blackened hulls bone-like in the gloom, still etched with the few surviving words of forgotten regiments, names consumed utterly by the war. Cast navigated the treacherous path at the point of their tiny spear, his movements precise and measured, a controlled flow between gaping shell craters and leaning piles of smoking debris. His monoknife hung ready, a loose weight at his thigh. His slung lasgun rested securely, its familiar pressure a barely noted constant against his ribs. Sound became profoundly scarce, an oppressive smothering blanket thick with dread. Only the soft, hushed crunch of boot sole on compacted grit, the nervitite groans of rusted structures settling ominously, twisting against foundations compromised by cluster melts or artillery shifts decades past, the relentless, desolate keening of wind tearing through jagged metal canyons. Every dozen paces, a closed fist rose abruptly from the figure at the front. Unspoken instinct transmitted instantly. Perfect frozen silence as the team vanished, bodies flat to the scorched earth, breaths held as eyes scoured potential shadows, hands tightened imperceptibly on trigger grips, ears straining to filter deception from the endlessly wailing void space sucking air through shattered towers. The wind roiled and groaned constantly, an atmospheric dirge above this city-sized tomb. But beneath its relentless threnody, Cast's obsidian gaze scanned empty alleyway framed by leaning walls, his senses perpetually honed razor-edge. Twice, faint clinks or metallic groans drifted audible solely because they lacked the pseudo-reason of the howling gales at higher altitudes. Then, distant sounds truly alien, truly threatening sharp metallic clanks that sounded like improperly bonded scrap plating shifting against flesh, too rhythmic for debris. The low choleric murmurs of multisyllabic guttural debate rising from unseen barrow pits to cut beneath the aerial lament. The distinct, hair-raising scrape shuffling of thick boots deliberately disturbing loose strata fragments forced upward through deep gravel friction. His team's eyes found him, pupils wide somewhere below obscured helmet rims, orc teeth grinding. Nearer, he detected a subsidiary pattern tracking perpendicular to their route. Cast pulsed another quick signal, urgency emphasized. The team flowed into the deeper gloom pooling near the vast foundation bones of what must once have been a towering Prafal residential annex. Rotundity remained in wall fragments curving above, an immense dome structure long torn open to the pallid sky. The colossal alloy skeleton arched into frayed emptiness, higher tiers collapsed entirely to form unnatural mounds blocking entire alleys far below, leaving stumps of ferrocrete standing like phallic ruins above. Affectionate ornamentation survived high on isolated fractured pillars, yellow-beige colors flaking away. He signaled the halt expressively. The four figures behind him vanished instantly, flat against slag piles beneath rad-scored pillars, weapons become rigid sculpture awaiting destruction or crisis beyond corporeal breath, one prone beneath dangerous slope trembling next to funk metal piles. Cass surveyed the destruction, feeling the dome fragment rumble earth-deep with groan of subterranean tectonic stresses, generating continuous pops from unsupported rockcrete vaultings far above his boot toes. They rested alongside cavalier heaps of fragmenting industrial pipes choked entirely by fallen roof superstructure. He needed direct eyes. Kneeling carefully amid shattered brick corners layered thick with carbon dust leached upward by hydrology, taking long seconds ensuring stability against overwhelming vibration on scenting intrusions, he retrieved the blessed, humming magnoculars buckled tight along his lower torso webbing. Grips pressed coldly into synth-leather finger underliners, barely insulating raw material roar transfers. He thumbed a focused torque wheel. Aperture amplifiers bypassed automatically, infrared narrowed from useless wasteland heat signatures, acutely framing cold-blooded opponents through airborne rock fragment, drifting haze particles. Fog irritation cleared multiplex filters. Vision crystallized brutally inside the enormous former habitat cavern interior, choked by repeated infrastructural collapses, blocking exits beyond his immediate tactical observation arcade of space. There, movement abruptly jagged within the flickering heat distortion, geometric perfected monstrosity viewfinder embryonic. Shapes, moving confidently as though the whole cavernous ruin speckled with glinting crystal remnants beneath shimmering heat, haze metal synth frames belonged utterly to their command. Despite distance, the characteristics seared into experienced icorneas, hulking silhouettes unmistakably projecting orcish deformations, distorted viewport sweep. Roamer frames lumbering insolently through the multiple arteries, framing entombed levels, navigated exactly as expected ownershipland squat planets, required under punch laser trails, emphasizing respective cycle manifestations, appropriately hierarchically followed. Observing simultaneous orchestration as clear written signage, posture careless, keypoint presented unequivocally, one particular larger simulation struck dominant with encircling aquacadits. Designed clearly for Maximus destruction perceptual shade, bulky unto exhaustion limit thresholds compressed underneath ill-fitting sheet metal armor plates, scavenged from multiple chassis formations, bonded inhumanely tight to sweating green torso scapulae. A rusted shoulder articulated jagged power unit vanished obscured behind thick tree-wide upper bisection musculature. Its head development possessed abnormally tusked prominence enhancing underbite posture. It paused commandingly by a slashaged pile characterization near the outer wall sequestering rot blacks beneath feeble battle moon illumination, penetrated supplemented negligible campfires, occasionally identifying nearby locations, without specific electromagnetic emission trails, framing priority targets worthy attention discipline process, flow emergencies. It kicked down aggressively at sudden disturbance gathered nearby material, detected high-frequency anomalies, mixed with decaying flesh odor signatures, captured legitimately within noisy electromagnetic patterns, below waveform recognition capabilities observed. Something shattered lightly from that kick audible across immense chamber space, past decay prophylaxis vents filtering breathable medium circulation, partly degraded progressively, through horrifying tire-deep decomposition layers, compacted beneath tread footprints, easy navigation evident. Human bones, uncountable heterogeneous patterns, splayed apart, accidentally loosening disintegration, to sealing exposed unconditioned levels. Work-fatigued corpse limbs broken obscenely apart, revealing grotesque torture patterns, excreted pathology evidencing predilection component focus, into alien mentality, unresolved conflict zones, completely fouling logic pathways. Cast unblinking witnessed activity penetration analysis, involuntarily trigger autonomic respiratory damping persistent programming blocks. His throat tightened, manually suppressing shock gasps, destined useless combat inefficiency. Grip tightened on the magnocular's frame, synthetic composite structure, demanding functional concentration, neurons sharp savant like frozen decision tree, metaphor, constructed perfectly vertical orientation, facing conceivable enemy proliferation vectors attacks. He watched the greenskin patrol pattern, under silent imposition, algorithmic proofing grid analysis units. Tracked spacing, irregularly stable, sufficient speed, backed by semi-conscious swagger, psychologically evident axes when comatose, lacked challenging opponents, established predictable behavioral subroutines, weapon status primarily carries oversized cutting implements, slicing potential perceptible. Supplemented by cumbersome slow-rate slug munition, hand cannons, elevating recoil mitigation, tonnages detectable from evident mass benchmarks, established physiology baselines, obtained previously planetfall engagement, video records, quick access memory banks, neutral filtration parameters, standard approved deployment requirements, comforting objective verification, freedom parameters, doctrines suggest patrol op confidence, supremely arrogant regarding external factors, intervention protocols. Presuming known malady parameters recorded, alpha status render, orc psych C on FIDA NT. Confirmed command unit operational exterior imposture traces, erased continuously conceptual screening against implanted wood critical threat authorizations, save familiar unsecured vector exposure rating, strictly prohibitively profiled, as excessively uncontestable domain occupation charter, signed evidently extant currently. Query response standard quiet frequency, modulated through linked encrypted channel comm unit, integrated into neck bracing section seals. Drex, numbers, weapons. Drex's distinctive Burhis filter distorted voice whispered static lad directly into bone conduction nodes, along mastoid line directly above dynamic collar friction points against plate contact elements, tightly compressed mobility frame hinge limitations, requiring articulate care execution training maneuvers approved for unit preservation, statistically significant efficiency determinations, achieved merit collection reference library systems, processed immediately for simulations visual. Cortex overlay deficiencies. Cast tracked figures, watching their motor functionality predictions, correctness likelihood under sensor capability limitations, overcoming incomplete barriers, debris obscuration, partial blocks, calculating percentage visibility, utilizing distributed processing, autonomous configuration intelligence, modus watchdog algorithms enabled. 4 confirmed, marking 1 heavy weapon unit weapon confidence, range of standard deviation acceptable. Probability estimates higher density cluster, units operating deeper interior structures threshold. Operate perceptually arrogant, expect status threat assessment, substandard, respond instruction set, hierarchical prediction, windows closing. Silence paused, precisely operational mission brief, calibrated precisely under duress. Communication buffer, anticipated load, transmitted residual drain, minimal power management, check, affirmative protocol, dataled in telemetry side channels, continuously self-monitoring pressure seals integrity on environmental suite biocompatibility. Holding posture acknowledged. Came the clipped static written reply seconds later, whilst cast maintained rigorous orbital locking perspective, totally defensive stability, despite developing forces magnification optics, increasing involuntary tremor occurrence probability, gradually increasing fatigued muscle retention, sensory motor integration, synchronized enough status probe transmit acceptance path, tested living operator parameters, fluctuating predictably, await full zone recon sweep confirmation, numbers impaired. Hostile presence 60-second mission maxima, authorized critical necessity, before movement clearance activated, prioritize minimal comm exposure, shadow team worldly gods, preserve your soul frames, brother sergeant discipline maintain. Imperative operative execute reconnaissance secondary, before primary push essential survival negligence, forbidden absolute parameters, defined protection hell assault conditional authorization, subject to damnation, immediately cast lowered magnoculars, mechanically slow movement ingrained against gray base, corrupted air currents constantly shifting visible trace debris, particulates infinitely irritating ocular surfaces, requiring Netrin rinsing moments, unavailable operational mission, accelerated. Timeframe constraints, maximal survival realization, compromise unavoidable risk parameters, acknowledged personal stats sheet approval, logged encrypted perpetual record dump offline burial capsule proofing, commence underlying unspoken directive programmed instincts. Beneath heavy cloaking, weave artificial camouflage environmental cloak, installed personal air filtering apparatus within sealed helmet suite tight against debris ingress, eyes only visible 0.1% exposure acceptable mission. Losses accumulative worst-case scenario acceptable analysis, probabilistic battlefield exclusion lemma, formidable magnitude acceptable parameter stability statistical analysis, engine simulation indicating worst-case acceptable risk metrics calculated. Net gain for Imperial standpoint strategic oversight cleared acceptable losses negligible. He unpins soft cover material manual precision rigidity friction path, scanning for immediate temporary departure signature, expose mortality physics calculations, discarding likelihood strike enhancement algorithms, operational practiced evasion paths, stored neurochip backup drive. Psychological impression requirement. Maintain fleeting shadow resonate combat experience archives, filtered double-blind phase tests psychology approval prevention subconscious hesitation, neural imprint drill patterns overriding panic response training kicking, neural pathways acceleration, exceeding normal Fortiscon estimated time reconsolidation, period crucial milliseconds, surviving breaches unknown enemy-centric zones, retrieval probability affirmative datasets. He exhaled slowly, deliberately forcing air resistance minimization, neural override endocrine control, activating metabolic suppression, secondary temporarily accessed purpose maximize, ghosting capability metric enhancement, cheap pattern detection, threshold ratification, stealth smoothness perfection, instantaneously synthesized nearly machine movement patterns, mapping perhaps memories, deep would recurrent dangerous fauna hunting tracking scenario, with the great leather-scaled beasts of the Ashfang wilds mirroring merciless. Patterns established eons before fleeing landfall human encroachment instances, recorded partially operational presently relevant updating combat profile, intertwining associative memory recall subroutine, executed perfectly parallel assistance, thinking process subterranean biological regulations, rigidly maintained under armor biology safeguards, interlocked consciousness immersion, demanding absolute concentration, despite proximity sensory, input ignorance potential consequences. Irrelevant psychological barriers, erected instantly foundation trust, trained companions, maintaining defense perimeters automatic rifle, array patterns synchronized probability matrix normalization estimators, running backscan indices probability calculation detection entity, above human threshold operational transmission, confidence structural planning, derived non-visible formation, escape vectors dimensional reality, unfolding distance parameter certainty distance. Solidified scanning vectors, immediate tactical readout, ignoring overall strategic implications, compiling microreality, incredibly fast combat attrition, experience, objective survival carry mission deliver intelligence, excess waste currently. Then he melted sideways from cover like mist dispersing chromatophores, inverted mimic trying become unvalve spectra, exhaust viscous fluids, painting instantaneous shadow motion, blurring possible spark metal reflection angles cautious, avoid heavy dirt kicking geyser, fabricated stepping points, predefined route stratagem memory, efficiently sheer professionalism compressing doubt psychological statics, backing neural effort, prioritizing movement dancing, blade edge silent execution, calculus life savings. Expenditure necessary investment costing hourly neuronal degradation, acceptable wear and tear replacement, provisioned later beneath mantle manual deedweldy, repeating circuits echo salvation possibility, fundamentally proposition encrypted trust faith metrics, overwrite empirical data, implausibly good luck acting foundationary belief resolve confrontation, eventual positive outcome calculated possibility, algorithmically amplified against vast dragons entropy manifested enemies. Galactic filth necessity, effort dedicate, obliterating religious order sacrifice fist, closed resolve witnessing horrific manifestation, convictional strength, yet unmelted immortal backbone prepared sacrifice non-existence duty, before death motto, inscribed somewhere machine stamp fusion organ casing injector lineage purity codes, etched nanoscale gamma-entranced etching processes, provably immutable within chamber plating museum display, objectively historical ritual ornamentation. Unimportant true resonance, cloaked stealthering nemesis crawling beneath rain macronail impacts, wide slowly distorts form silhouette chaos mixture flight gain, steadily leaving confidence vector, Solidified shadow companions rested prime ready. Commit instantly call retrieved indirect. If needed, no safe word available condition. Detected deterioration, nonlinear acceptance path, non-zero uncertainty, inflation risk, quietly logical boiling point, hemisphere, executing pattern memory, moving lower. Approaching contact point trajectory vectors, coalescing solitary reflection, perfect combat mind, sublimated noise physicals, subordinating despair necessity, sweeping coming structures, vision sharpening outline disaster, desired pathway machine-like outlines trajectories, narrow creep forward, pushing gone deeper alone territory crawling spirit abandoned tangible pursuit information cognition, shut decreasing signature thermal profile, minimized optimized pattern flesh metal resynthesized component. Vocational sacrifice, spiritual fortitude approved. His cloak edges shifted minimally. Designed weaving technique, absorbing majority visual motion, coherence, wavelet patterns, dissipating recognizable outline, rendering him nothing but distortion, flickering sluggishly pixelated malfunction sensors, peripheral wreckage consciousness, abandoning vividness, reduced computational focus analog, ghost black energy, recycling waste heat signature dissipation, maintaining detectable threshold, below standard infantry tactical awareness ranges, established global command center theoretical. Models, air thickened oppressively, choking fine gritty particles, swirling downwards dense particles that weren't simply dust but leached minerals from effective ruin pulverization horizons, layered kilometers, thick compacted planets, deep intestine ecosystems, choked this bizarre European colony sky world scenario, simulating volcanic planetary death, enacted by millennial war shrine ghosts manifesting engine. He crawled shards rubble field beneath feet outward facing jagged teeth, rising like ugly broken crowns, tearing synthetic glove fabric, instantly blood niggled sensor, glove input registering microtrauma, filtered command chip acknowledgement autonomous combat stimulants, preloaded legally purged morale restoration drugs, blocked HUD projection, minimized radiation, hazard indicators, flashing amber danger ratings, marginal surviving filtration capacity, operational integrity checks partial. Confirmation functionality precision lost increasingly, until breakthrough failure completely preventable warp damnation, practically guaranteed psychology, soothing rituals meditation mantras to pitum lucidum flashback imaginings, calming fields from childhood mindscape manipulation, implant, efforts momentarily cut off partially successful retaining steady breathing patterns, calibrated against relaxed metrics impersonatus, proficiently structuring neural control progress pathway ticking boxes. Mental seals properly functioning acknowledging bodily alarm signals, dimmed peripheral muffled stream carries, unrelentingly pulverizing ambition, objectives, fighting noise of identification possibilities, highlighting critical evidence path. He advanced low crouch to snake motion, constrained flexibility plate susceptibility, forcing awkward dismount procedures, through treacherous slopes metal moaning colossal, ruinous sheathing rattling animal sounds, predictably periodic silence passive acceptance possible curious patrol patterns, intersect probability matrix simulations, constantly updating visible stress markers, registering psychological battle isolation trauma, crossed psychological report mandated medical dissolution forbidden. Years ago applied progressively supersede command hierarchy orders, noncompliance condemned sacred tools, sacrifice salvation faith, amplified exponentially persistent ahead stood habdome fragment, enormous like titan femur cracked open once housing multitudes human frames spiraling worlds ago permutation rotational collapse metaphorical significance, layered failure flawless proof humanity defeat, pervasively survived marginally elsewhere perhaps unimportant topology, acquiring drastically. Changed access point functional analysis, tactical advantage, opportunistic progress possible situation, stable operating window narrow constantly degrading under temporal pressure, threatened exposure spiraling detrimental reality perspectives, filtering necessity advanced battle meditation, preparing final conflict outside mere personal testament, vast bereavement purpose service, holding central focus ruthless exclusion, emotional leakage suppression techniques implemented near perfection. Anatomical neural rerouting hypothalamus processes, macabre reality, witnessed crossing obstacle nearly collarbone height, field unfused plasteel, leaving human sleeves, still graphic fabric torn, piss yellow emergency, stripes rainbow flashing memory neuro images, discarded clearing pathways, thinking rationally skirting walls large enough sublimate, giants decay absorption, collected shadows deeper pools darkness, clinging obsessive attachment skeletal remains, not yet obliterated utterly beneath open sky. Sky becomes ceiling perhaps fractal geometries, angled dedicated misery, channelizing corpse exposed elements, decay standing sentinel still upright mockery eventual greatest, demise counted ritual pile antique workers, sold mineral soul economics geography manufactured inadequacy fatigue, retreated without hope sacrifice abandonment considerable agony, recognized worthless despite self-deceptive value structures, collapsing painful Senate original colony, inaugurated great celebration. Imperial decreed victory planet, grabbed heavens ignoring verdant potential, worked pumping deep incessantly miles, seeking salvation's currents below seemingly insignificant existence section downward, uncovering mineral Tesla coil vein perhaps. But success fatally overlain here imagining ceased incarnated reality checking firm mute progress dust coating everything insulating hell from touch crawling over large discomfort payload anatomical limbs, adapt gamely accruing wound parameters. Incident report initiation stage, concluded analytical detachment, observing physical strain pointless object lessons. He reached the corpses blockading silhouette vaguely human piled deliberately pile crude, wall mockery architecture structural relief, overcharged past meaning orc construction methodology, insisted decomposition abandonment, conquered remains piled containers, refused discarded objects profound indifference, recycled practical obstruction defense network, dispassionately conceived defeat intentional planning, concluded useless conflict, ended permanent terror atmosphere choking victory solidified. Foundation's violence sustained fundamental existence requirement pagan-style worship, impossible eradicate recognition, sermon finished feeling, settled abrupt clarity unemotional distance, validating professional indifference, required severely scan area move onward predetermined mind map, coordinates prioritized urgency relevance, maximizing survivable extraction possibility relevance, decaying metrics progressive time investment cost, escalating exponentially necessity substitute doubt. Operational paradigm, accepted baseline decisively execute contingency, mapped earlier predictive matrix resilience, paths divergent logical extremes, compiled possible outcomes, projected success probability factoring newly acquired intelligence refreshed calculation matrix heuristic overlay visual anchors, acquired identity pathway vulnerable information pursuit necessity, override scar formation psychological barrier, real danger diminishing prioritized mission parameters. Externally immutable override psychological defensive shielding, engaged whirring softly mental barrier, built hardened steel figuratively beating against perceived immaterial weakness resilient, according training memory, reassured presence established consistency, achieved momentary stability, avoiding pitfalls paralyzing reflex systems pushing weakness momentarily overcome advanced physical discomfort signals, suppressed efficiently preserved energy conservation, mode activated externally. Passage nearly cost catastrophic noise, betrayed vibration tremor potential audible sandpit stability, failed momentarily clattering debris small avalanche pieces, cascade caught unplanned slight movement, arrested observer position possibly exaggerated friendly paranoia heightened, reviewed debrief suppression protocols, instilling readiness perception, false alerts discarded false positives, waste precious neural bandwidth concentration resources, diverted monitoring reactivity analytics treading careful. Precipice alertness fatigue, balanced perfectly disciplined muscles, crying inactive positions, held impossibly long periods, exemplified training excellence mortality chains, forging disciplined eternal soldier framework, approved self-worth momentarily validated passing milestone perception, dead achieving ghost-like infiltration, excellent spiritual communion with ideals warrior ascetic purity, attained briefly shedding weak biological constraints, crawling onward through dead landscape feel ancient rockcrete. Bloodstains oily grit petroleum, scented imperfect ignition histories, traces fuels poured sensory inputs, dimmed consciously circumventing focused touch kept velvet glove, barely brushing remnants someone else's existence shreds synthetic clothwork trousers durable fabric suppliantly designed beaten harsh mine environments flammability minimized demonstration attachment, complex societal structures, broken discard crudely chopped screwdriver hardened oxide surface handle imperceptibly. Extracted emergency survival kit tool, long past expiration salvation usefulness, faded concepts forgotten desperate ruined heat, fused artifact defunct pistol, barely recognizable handle remaining, fused chunk melted plasteel useless weight, pathetic last attempt defense meaningless conclusion, drawn binary monumental plasma-driven total defeat planet, helpless weeping victim toothed machinery grinding, slowly oblivion everything connected cascading downwards simplicity facing elemental. Dissolution personalized absence, virtue hope individual story, finished microscopic, lost colossal planetary ruin nightmare grandiose torturous concepts, irrelevant ending predetermined, nothing mattered advancement objective specifications, outlined neatly, geometric operational necessities, psychological concessions, defeated advancement logic battle map overlay reality, terrain typing undetectable somatic tremor suppression neural dampeners, moderately engaged near maximum tolerance levels. Physical exhaustion managed dynamically sparing reserves, priority cardiac, overdrive prevention. Each tile recognized meaningless embedded pain concealing necessary shift, non-symbolic inconvenient rocks, obstacle clearing pathway tracing continuously updating infiltrative pattern pathway optimal decided seconds velocity, increase unscheduled permissible governed terrain topology climb success probability. Recalibrated past encountered corpse remains minutes slow deliberate silent maul. The stale air of the command post hung thick with the low, urgent murmur of strategists. Their voices clipped and hushed over the flickering loom glow of tactical displays. Mud and the acrid tang of Recaf, bitter from oversteeping, barely masked the deeper scent of exhaustion radiating from the officers of the 122nd Aryan Recon. Their eyes were hollow caverns, their faces etched with the relentless grind of the campaign. At the epicenter, Colonel Atren Voss loomed, a scarred monolith in a battle-worn flak coat, hands resting heavily on the map's illuminated edge. Opposite him, pinpoint rigid, stood the commissar, pristine greatcoat almost defiant against the surrounding grime-gloved fingers tapping an idle rhythm on his sheathed chainsword. Cast's boots made no sound on the steel flooring as he entered. Voss looked up first, those flint gray eyes cutting through the gloom, appraising him like a weapon being test-balanced. "Scout Cast, you have your report." Cast nodded curtly, the movement tight with urgency. He pulled the tattered field map from his belt, unfolding it across the command table's scarred surface. Fresh ink details sketched across it. The refinery's twisted innards, corridors distorted into kill zones, defenses solidified from scrap. "They've dug in, sir." Cast's voice was low, compressed bedrock, layered with undeniable certainty. "Turned that refinery into a fortress. Makeshift barricades, firing lines, sentry towers welded from salvage. The tunnels beneath the colony, that's their hole. They've dragged prisoners down there." Voss's jaw clenched impossibly tight. A sudden heavy stillness smothered the post, amplifying the distant drone of cogitators. Cast pushed on. Their leader not some simple chieftain, this warboss. Different, bigger, smarter. He's got the mech boys working overtime, building something right in the refinery's guts. Didn't dare get close enough for a clear look, but whatever it is, it's warity. At that, the commissar leaned forward, shadows deepening the lines of his grim face. "Gargant," he mused, the single word dark omen hanging heavy in the air. Or something fouler, those beasts, their monstrous abominations. Voss didn't turn, his focus anchored to Cast's lines scribbled on the map. "Cannot afford it completed," the commissar added, ice in the undertone. "And the tunnels," Cast continued, drawing Voss's gaze back. "They run deep, sir, deeper than we thought. Let them settle any further. It'll bleed us white for weeks just to root them out. By then their numbers'll swallow us." He paused, letting the impending doom resonate. "We hit them before they're ready." Voss held silent a moment longer, a mountain weighing crushing burdens, then nodded. "Sharp, decisive. Agreed, time a luxury we don't have." He straightened, shoulders squaring against the exhaustion, addressing the silent officers. "We take the refinery, one strike, full force, no siege. We lack the time, the bodies." His heavy finger stabbed down into the map's flickering light, marking 3 points along the refinery's shell. 3 prongs. Main assault strikes the western approach, their thickest defenses. Make them believe it's the full hammer. Armored core leads, earthshakers break the walls. Infantry follow, pin them down. His finger traced a treacherous circumvention across the map's glow, a choked, partially buried path snaking through the ruin of a collapsed mine shaft. "This is where you come in, Cast." The scout's gaze sharpened, focus narrowing to that single, fragile line. Silence held the tent again, thick and electric. Cast stood unmoving in the semidark, arms crossed, breath measured and deep as Voss's scarred knuckles traced the route one final time. "Guide the armored column. Through the eastern ruins, only stable artery for heavy armor. We move at sundown, under darkness." Voss's tone was steelbound control, every word freighted with consequence. "Need your eyes, Scout. Column bogs down. Momentum dies, the fight dies with it." "Understood." Cast's nod was slow, final. He dwelled too long in the corpsecity that was Grimhold's rift. Knew its rotting belly, its gaping tunnel maws, its ravines disguised as stable ground, a landscape waiting to swallow the Imperial fist whole. He de-witnessed it, the crushing indifference of the terrain crippling might. "I'll find the path, sir," Voss exhaled, a released storm rubbing rough knuckles across stiff jaw muscles. "Good, get some rest." "You'll need every shred of it." For a heartbeat, Cast hesitated, a predator scenting a flaw unseen, then nodded again. Turning wordlessly, he vanished back into the embrace of the benighted camp. The Imperial encampment sprawled like a suppurating wound across the ashen dirt of the rift, trenches bleeding into prefab bunkers, lemon rust tanks half-buried like ancient warbeasts resting grimly, cannon barrels crusted with grime and grit. The air thrummed with the distant clang of engineers fortifying barricades, their silhouettes jerking in the harsh glare of floodlights. Cast moved toward the mess tent, led by the smoke haze of cook fires and the low drone of weary voices thick with surrender. Inside, the atmosphere was a felt thing dense with the glutinous smell of ration grok grub rendered into gruel, the burned bitterness of recaf that had long since forgotten warmth, and the thin, sharp scent of lasmoke trailing from troopers too hollow for words. The mess was packed, yet unnervingly quiet. no rolling laughter, no boasts of glory echoing off the canvas. These were faces etched by too many tomorrows, conserving breath for the next nifage moment that determined survival. Cast filled his tin tray with colloidal starch the color of sorrow, flavor leaching away into the metal. He found a gap near the tent's edge where the air, marginally cooler, carried less the weight of hopelessness and more the sigh of dust-laden wind. He ate the tasteless mass mechanically, silencing the hunger gnawing deep inside his gut. Drek dropped opposite him, tray clutched in scarred hands, its contents barely disturbed. He rubbed redrimmed eyes with calloused knuckles, long moments passing in shared silence that spoke of distances crossed and souls leached dry. Finally, Drek spoke, voice gravel under heavy stone. "You reckon we'll make it?" Not looking at Cast, just staring at the unappetizing slop. "Through tomorrow," Cast glanced up, meeting the sergeant's profile etched against the gloom. "Some of us will," he replied, the words flat, factual, resonant with ingrained truth. Drek gave a sound like rusty gears mangling a laugh, shaking his head once, a short, doomed tremor. That's what I thought." He finally scooped a mouthful of gray paste, chewing with the solemnity of swallowing guilt. Outside, the wind soughed mournfully through the skeletal ruins, carrying the grating shriek of metal tearing on metal, the unceasing cacophony of greenskin war engines shaping hell deep within the dark. The enemy wasn't idle. Cast breathed out in a slow, controlled stream, pushing his tray aside half-eaten. "See you at the refinery," he stood. "Try not to die before I get there." Drek snorted faintly. "Same to you, Scout." Moving through the barracks was like navigating a crypt when sleep offered little respite from the war outside. Silence reigned, broken only by the quiet scuff of boots on cold decking and the distant hiss-rasp of a vox channel leaking fractured, static-laden prayers to saints who couldn't hear them. Cast past rows of metal bunks, some occupied by the deep, slow breaths of the claimant-be exhaustion, others by figures sitting sentinel over their own futures, fingers moving with ritual precision over lacerful components, eyes pools of shadow holding the weight of the coming dawn. He reached his cot, sat on its hard edge. His hands took over, memory guiding the assessment. Chainmail cloak, worn, patched, but still shimmering with spectral potential. Magnus lenses meticulously cleaned, secured at his waist. Smoke grenades, 4 smoking jewels cradled in their pouches. Stubber, charge-a-pack locked, scratches testament to long service. Then the knife, the mono-edged blade. He turned it over in his hand. The single-molecule edge caught the low light like frozen mercury. On its surface, dried dark as sin into the grip, crusted flecks of orc blood from an earlier encounter. He could wash it clean. The ritual demanded it. He did not. Leather dropped onto the meager cot. Cast leaned back against the rough blanket, a long, slow sigh escaping him, the sound of a spring unwinding under immense pressure. Sleep would ambush him, perhaps, a fleeting reprieve, and when it released him, the war, the true, grinding war, would be roaring at the gates. He closed his eyes, seeing not rest, but the stark, shifting geography of the battlefield beyond the camp's flimsy wire. It waited, patient, hungry. The pre-dawn march back towards the jaws of the enemy stronghold unfolded in an oppressive, tactile silence. Cast led the creeping leviathan of the armored column through the corpse landscape of Grimhold's Rift, threading steel snakes through the debris-scoped skeleton of a dead city. He moved ahead with his small cadre of scouts, phantoms shifting through the jagged silhouettes of shattered hablocks and the rusted ribs of Manufactoria corpses. Wordless hand signals fluttered through the gloom. Freeze, advance, hold. Behind him an avalanche crawled, the lemon rust tanks, hulking titans of relentless purpose, rolling forward on grinding treads that pulverized rubble into choking dust, engines growling a subterranean counterpoint to the city's death rattle. Trailing them in cautious, staggered lines, the shadowed infantry moved, faces lost beneath helmet rims, weapons locked against the imminent. Every nerve hummed. Minutes bled into hour-long heartbeats. He raised a fist. Utter, instantaneous stillness washed over the column. Soldiers dissolved into shadow, becoming indistinguishable parts of the landscape, wraiths waiting within ferrocrete tombs and collapsed archways. It was the cautious crawl of an immense predator stalking through thorns. Ahead, clawing at the bruised sky, the silhouette of the refinery solidified, unchanged, colossal. Ruined sentinel spewing its acrid bile, its tipped stack stabbing skyward, its bloated belly lit from within by the dirty orange glow of infernal forges. Sound rolled out in waves, crashing against the ruins, the guttural bellows of triumphant orcs, the ceaseless industrial shriek of tearing metal, punctuated by the sudden, sharp bark of internal greenskin discord spilling into gunfire. Cast dropped low beside a frost-strimed, decaying pipeline signaling Drek crouched across a slab of cracked ferrocrete. Main force is set. Cast's voice held no fat, only the lean necessity of the moment. They hit the front, our dive to the east flank. Drek gave a curt nod heavy with unspoken consequence, his hand closing on the worn grip of his primed last pistol, bone-white knuckles stark against the gloom. We move quick once their bells rung. Expect their rearguard swarm when the big guns start singing. Bent low, Cast gestured sharply to the phantom forms of his scouts dissolving into the ruin field. They required no orders, understood the dance of sucking poison into the heart. He watched them flow like oil across shadows before refocusing towards the approach. Less fortified than the main gate, yes, but crawling not dead. Patrols prowled shambling, animal shadows wreathed in feral menace. Casts sank lower, still as stone. He signaled a trapdoor halt to the specters behind him. His gaze locked on a target, a straggler, an orc brute ponderously falling behind its kin, wrapped in crude plating welded to thickened flesh, its massive back turned, ignorant muscle rippling under greasy skin. The scout's gloved knuckles tightened convulsively around the familiar handle of his monoknife, hilt settling warm against his palm, blade cool as the void between stars, hungry for the silence before the coming storm. The pre-dawn chill seeped not just through his camacloak, but deep into the marrow of him, a reminder of the sudden, necessary violence that hung sharp on the bloody air. The scrap metal guardian remained oblivious, scavenged armor plates rattling against its bulk, its snaggle-toothed maw twisted into an absent sneer, lost in the simple brutality of scattering a child-sized heap of long-picked human femurs, a phlegmy chuckle grating in its thick throat at its own amusement. Cast moved fast, a distortion low against the mottled shadows, a lethal whisper skimming the refinery's grime-caked pavement. The greenskin sensed movement far too late, its piggish eyes widening a fraction as it began its lumbering turn, a lifetime too slow. Cast's monomolecular blade found its throat like a surgical strike, slicing clean through knotted muscle and corded veins with a wet, sucking sound. The beast choked, lifeblood a dark torrent spilling hot into the kicked-up dust, thick fingers clutching futilely at the ghastly wound. But Cast was already pulling it down, clamping a gauntleted hand over its frothing jaws, silencing the gurgling death rattle as he lowered the thudding weight gently onto the industrial refuse. One less scab taker. He wiped the blade clean on the orc's filthy, blood-soaked tunic, a single, efficient stroke, before giving the silent signal forward. They melted deeper into the skeletal wreckage, weaving between the looming stacks of rusted cargo crates leaning precariously, slipping beneath the twisted wreckage of half-toppled skeletal gantries. They hugged the deep, greasy pools of absolute darkness, not yet perforated by the distant, flickering flares, the reek of ozone and crude oil thick in Cast's nostrils. Above the constant metallic groans of settling wreckage, the deeper sounds grew, the gut-shaking roar of massive, poorly tuned engines vibrating the plating beneath their boots, the grating, tortured churn of ancient machinery pushed beyond resonance, and the guttural bellows of the unseen warboss hollering, command somewhere within the fortress heart of the refinery. Then Cast's fingers dipped into his assault webbing, brushing over the cold, satisfying solidity of the metallic cylinders snugged there, the grenades and charges ready for their devious purpose. Time to weave chaos into the green tide's very ground. Silently, grimly, Cast's unit dispersed like smoke on a battlefield wind, planting their gifts pungent smoke grenades primed to shroud and choke, blasting charges nestled within the gaps of rickety durasteel walkways groaning under their own decay, or secreted amongst clusters of stacked, orcish ammunition crates still bearing crude daubs of yellow paint. Some charges were wired to stress load beams high above, others, thermite-laced, placed within fuel lines that snaked between rusted pumping stations, traps designed to ignite the invaders' own crude abundance against them. Cast crouched low near the immense, abandoned corpse of a partially buried servo-hauler, its massive tracks frozen in dust, its cab crumpled. He secured a fierce bouquet of breaching charges deep within its rusted underbelly, fingers working with practiced speed despite the thick, flaking rust coating his gloves. As he tugged the final wire taut, a deep, sickening tremor rolled violently through the ground beneath him, not the groans of settling scrap, but a deliberate impact wave resonating through the bedrock. He turned sharply, pressing his entire body low against the corroded hull of a nearby half-buried pipeline, his breath a controlled metronome in the sudden stillness. Then, through the haze of flying metal dust and chemical fog, he saw the stunning, brutal prologue of salvation made manifest. The first artillery shells screamed out of the night sky, their high-pitched shriek cutting through darkness like banshee claws before detonating with soul-shattering force against the refinery's western walls. The impact buckled plating like tin, massive sheets of reinforced metal peeling back as a monstrous fireball vomited violently into the choked sky, the thunderous detonation and shockwave hammering the landscape and shaking loose curtains of jagged shrapnel from every surrounding structure. The waiting lemon rust tanks surged forward, their immense bulk finally revealed, main battle cannons belching deafening flame as high-explosive shells tore into visible enemy positions, their heavy armored tracks grinding relentlessly over the uneven ground beneath the protective umbrella of Imperial vengeance raining down. The orc response was immediate and mindless, a colossal roar of sheer surprise mixed with furious challenge echoing across the refinery, a brutal, discordant chorus rising against the storm that had come to sweep them into oblivion. Cast could feel the clumsily immense scramble through the soles of his boots, the clatter of dropped equipment, the bellowed orders thick with fury and panic, the thud of heavy bodies stampeding past each other in a chaotic rush towards the sudden, cacophonous assault thundering against their doorstep. It was time. Cast's thumb found the vox beat at his throat, his voice a low, flat rasp cutting through the burgeoning chaos. Detonating charges in 30 seconds. Stand clear. Acknowledge. Static gremlins crackled, then the curt clicks of acknowledgement echoed back. His unit faded into the deeper wreckage like wraiths swallowed by the roiling dust clouds kicked up by the bombardment, their traps primed, hungry, waiting. Cast knelt alone in the deepening scar of a shadow, senses achingly tuned, a hunter awaiting the perfectly orchestrated slaughter. He watched the swirling dust, listened to the frenzied greenskin movement beyond the immediate pyres, waiting for that precise terrible moment when the charging mobs would stumble, unsuspecting, into the killing zones he had meticulously prepared. Then, with the faintest, decisive flick of his thumb across the detonator slate, Cast painted the night with tornadic fire. The detonations didn't merely crack, they ripped upwards through the ruinous landscape in a monstrous, rolling wave. Flames geysered from collapsed gantries, severed pipelines vomited searing jets of burning promethium like arterial spray, mock stores of ordnance detonated in secondary, thunderous blossoms of pure destruction. Walls imploded, walkways sheared and plunged downward, crushing the crude barricades and the green tide scrambling around them. Smoke, thick and chemical, boiled into the sky, merging with the larger battle. Cast didn't hesitate. Turning, he vanished backwards into the fresh landscape of choking ash and flame, the rolling thunder consuming the space he'd just vacated. By the time he'd regrouped with his scouts, melted into the deeper ruins behind the oscillating chaos, the main battle had consumed the refinery's entrance. The air was a physical assault, the thunderous orangutan bark of lemon rust cannons firing on rapid cycle, the shrieking whine of lashbolts stitching burning paths through the gloom, the percussion-deep thump of Chimera's heavy bolters, and the distant, bestial shrieks of wounded or dying orcs, bleeding into one oppressive, deafening orchestra of annihilation. Cast moved swiftly now, death become direction, leading his scouts deeper into the refinery's mangled viscera, plunging into the remains of a shattered hab complex. Ancient walls of Ferrocrete stood scorched bone-black and pocked like disease-ridden skin. Entire sections collapsed entirely, filling the narrow, corpse-choked corridors with treacherous mounds of rubble they navigated around or climbed over. And over everything, thick, warm, and unmistakable beneath the sting of ozone and promethium, lay the heavy, sweet-written stink of spilled human blood, coppery and dense in the back of the throat. Something had died here recently, something human and likely unfinished. Cast raised a clenched fist, the silent signal instantly freezing his squad mid-stride, a scattering of shadows blending into the crumbling geometries around them. He tilted his head, eyes narrowed, straining against the overwhelming wall of distant battle noise, the earth-shaking impacts of shells, the stuttering chatter of heavy guns listening for something here. For a moment, only the brittle trickle of shifting grit, the moaning wind snagging on broken transparasteel frames, the metallic pinging heat radiation settling somewhere off in the gloom. Then it came, a weak, ragged cough, a desperate sucking of air barely audible beneath the rage of war. Human. Cast moved without a sound, stepping over a collapsed permacrete beam, his boots finding silent purchase on the powdered stone. He followed the faint, dark trail of smeared blood leading like a grim, fading ribbon deeper into the ruin's gut. The others held position, scanning the twisted entry points, weapons tracking unseen angles. Pushing cautiously through a buckled doorway into what might once have been a communal refectory, shattered tables, a fractured nutrient dispenser unit spilling wax-like paste, Cast saw them. Huddled in the filthiest corner, crammed into the lee of a crumbling ferrocrete wall like terrified insects seeking shelter, were 6 survivors. 3 were scarecrow-thin, barely clothed in rags, ribs stark against grimy skin, faces hollowed by starvation into skull-flayed masks, eyes sunk in pits of exhaustion holding only shock-still terror. One was a woman, clutching a small boy barely more than an infant against her thin chest, her shaking hand clamped brutally over his mouth, silencing any whimper, her own terrified stare fixed straight ahead on the flickering shadows. 2 bore wounds that reeked of infection and sweat. A younger man lay slumped against the cracked wall, his lower leg a mess of unnatural angles and stained cloth wrappings already soaked black with old, congealed blood and fresh pus, his face slick with fever sweat, eyes glazed and unfocused. An older man, wrapped in torn, bloody rags that might once have been an imperial worker's uniform, clung weakly to a makeshift mace fashioned from a snapped length of heavily rusted pipe, knuckles white even as his entire frame trembled with the hopeless effort of wielding it. Cast lowered his lasgun slowly, deliberately non-threatening. "You're safe," his voice rasped, scraping dryly. "Imperial Guard." The woman gasped audibly, her breath hitching like a choked sob. "Emperor, preserve us." She managed to wheeze, the words barely a whisper. Cass knelt beside the wounded man with the mangled leg, ignoring the stench of putrescence that intensified unsettlingly at close range. Two gloved fingers pressed against the clammy skin of the man's throat, finding a pulse weak, thready, and far too fast. Up close, the youthful face beneath the grime and pain was painfully young. "How long?" Cass asked, his mask of stern control slipping just enough to reveal the underlying tension. The kneeling older man swallowed painfully, his voice a dry rasp amplified by the tortured rumble of shells hitting the outer defenses. "Days, weeks, Emperor, I lost count. They the greenskins they swept through. Took most over to the deep mines for the slave pits," or he trailed off, eyes darting away from Cass's steady gaze, haunted by unspeakable echoes that needed no words. "We hid, waited, hoped, but the screams coming from the mineshafts," his voice fractured, crumbling entirely. He didn't need to finish the description. The pure terror twisting his worn features said it louder than any vox. Cast's eyes flicked instinctively to the child. The boy's impossibly large, terrified eyes, redrimmed with exhaustion and unshed tears, stared fixedly at Cast, unblinking. It felt like an accusation. Cast exhaled slowly, harshly through his nose, the scent of blood and decay clogging his throat. Protocol was a Nifige certainty. Advance. Engage the primary objective. Secure the sector. Guard doesn't stop for wounded stragglers. Not here. Not with the battle raging, Voxnois bleeding actively into enemy ears. Not with the tactical stakes clawing at his spine. These were ghosts already, bleeding out in slow motion in the middle of a lead storm. Logic screamed to move, to hit the objective, to finish the mission. He should leave the woman her silence, the old man his futile defiance, the child its muffled terror, and fade back into the killing ground, to linger courted discovery. To transmit risked annihilation, but the hollow eyes of the boy anchored him. He couldn't. The damned logic broke against the raw, pitiful humanness of them, huddled amidst the rubble like refuse. Cast's hand moved to the vox bead at his throat, shielding his mouth, his voice pitched low, barely audible even to his own men waiting nearby, the cool metal slick against his adrenaline-damped skin. Cast to command. 6 civilians confirmed survivors. Grid Gamma 7. Hab complex adjacent primary Eastern refinery conduit. Severely injured and malnourished requiring immediate medical, requesting urgent extraction. Static snarled back instantly, grating and sharp in his inner ear. Then Drek's voice sliced through, tinny, strained, clipped to the point of snapping. "Damn it, Cast, insanely critical. Vox offset minimal. Extraction request acknowledged. Patching directive to rear echelon, no assets immediately proximate." A scratchy pause, engine screaming distantly in the background static. Possibly a razor flight clearing Shackton Gully could divert for dummy run, we cannot spare escort. Negative Valkyrie gunship cover this sector currently. High-risk window. Hold position. Repeat. Hold position protectives until extraction coded Zeta flagged confirms vector. Out. The brittle connection died, leaving the crackle of distant battle amplified tenfold in the silence that followed in the hovel's ruin. Cast felt the transmission like a beacon flare, and the static feedback from Drek confirmed a leak. A proximity alarm triggered somewhere within the enemy's crude scannernet. Something heavy shifted nearby, not settling rubble, not the concussion of distant tanks. The distinct crunch of heavy, unbothered boots grinding purposefully on loose debris. Then the wet, phlegmy snorting, deep-chested, almost gleeful, followed by hard-edged guttural voices, barking crude syllables. Orcish. Cast moved instantly, a silent cascade of controlled panic. His fingers snapped to his lips in a sharp, universal gesture for absolute silence aimed at the civilians, the message burning in his eyes. He didn't have breath to spare for warnings. Faded back into welcome greasy shadow, lasgun coming up smoothly from Lowrity, seeking pressure points on the scarred beam across the collapsed room. He settled behind a collapsing ferrocrete pillar, its core twisted rebar exposed like skeletal fingers towards the remnants of a blown-out entranceway across the ruined chamber. The orcs lumbered into view seconds later, visibly agitated, sniffing the air like hounds catching a feather of scent. 4 of them, brutish green-pink skin glistening with sweat and grit under rusted mismatched plate armor scraps crudely strapped on, blotchy yellow glyphs nearly invisible beneath layers of filth and dried, darker fluids. They scrutinized the ruins, crude slugger rifles held at tense readiness. Something boss, smells little. Tingle's snuff box. Right air, one grunted, a hulking brute with a jagged purple scar running diagonally across his distended, wart-covered face. He nervously shifted the heavy ammo feed chained to his belt-fed muzzle choppa. Cast became stone. Pure focus narrowed down his sight picture, tracking the lead greenskin, his breathing suspended. The probing orc stepped closer, kicking out plaster chunks, its porcine eyes scanning the cluttered darkness, passing over where Cast merged with shadow and corrosion. It looked directly towards where the woman huddled, barely moving, her hands still clamped desperately over the child's mouth, almost petrified. The beast took another shuffling step forward, head lowered. It sniffed loudly, wetly. Its small, reddish eyes blinked. At the dust-string instant that its gaze fixed on the nearly imperceptible distortion Cast's chain-lialing cloak generated against the shifting firelight patterns reflected off the beam, the scout struck. Not Cast. His blade didn't flash. Aeldar, his scout, blurred from his pinning position further behind, materializing like vengeful ghost. The monomolecular knife edge shimmered, cutting air then brutally chopping clean through the near-shaven neckskin bulging above the lead orc's crude leather gorget. The beast made a wet, surprised gurgle halfway between confusion and pain, already collapsing as Aeldar ripped the blade free, dark blood spurting high. The second orc, barely pivoting, whipped its slugger around, bringing it to bear on Aeldlar's dodge towards wrecked generator housing. Only to receive Cast's precisely angled last shot, drilling a cauterized hole through its lower skull with a crack hiss, vaporizing bone and brain in a puff of steam. It stiffened, collapsing instantly. The remaining two bellowed rage, fury, erupting vocal shockwave, instinct rather than strategy, and fired simultaneously. Sparks erupt wildly. Crude solid slugs tore through brittle permacrete, punching fist-sized holes in walls, shattering moldering plasticrete consoles into jagged shards, ricocheting, singing off exposed, ancient rebar. The Cast had already shifted, gone like smoke, pivoting around to flank, keeping low behind the twisted pile girders, heart-pounding piston in his chest hybrid claw its cage keeping sight picture steadily, through drifting dust clouds, obstructive endorphins, artificial calm lascan, steadied arms, braced firing stance, sure where he expected it would, one stepped forward, snorting frustration, scanning wildly to its side. Cast fired from barely 5 meters behind the waist-thigh barrier chunk, collapsed pipe long snapped from overhead conduit ultremor. It might have been Lysine in flash, enraged red-eye gleaming ought transform into gaping astonishment core. It'd rather create burn paralysis slugger, clattering twitching hands spasming even after life fled livershot instagin killing momentum. Slammed tired body stammer backwards, collapsing into heap kicking. Spastically, the final orc spun around to face Truly. Its massive shoulders heaving and devoid confusion strategy, just pure carnivorous rage, compressed into snarl-splitting scarred face, showing jagged yellow-brown tusks. Breath-reeking battlefield filth, poisoned ammunition atmospherics, potent perhaps psychic too, finding Cast barely 6 feet away the gap Karen bridge muzzle microcrystalline lens bore, fixed eternally between its eyes fatal accuracy, demanded slight adjustment trigger squeeze caress soft finality. The orc's entire body flinched violently as if slapped by the invisible laspel. Torso thrown back, then collapsing forward to knees, before slumping heavily headlong onto the scarred refinery deck plates. The furious light in its small, primitive eyes flickering once, then extinguishing in darkness, blood pooling, instant ceasefire silence, descended once more shattered by distant artillery. Cast didn't spare corpses glance scanning angles guardedly priority, only survivors remain safe. Clean graph bayonet sheath careful wipe, thumb-smeared greenskin blood, tattered rest bandolier material strand, kept ready waiting failure return warm, extracting breath mist vapor mingling cold only evidence, strain stepping back towards, survivors seeing woman staring past him hand forehead smeared child filth fingernails white death grip sleeve old man spoke first voice lower gravel whisper, exhausted shock barely register vibrating air. Who are you really? Cast didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head upwards, gaze piercing the swirling dust cloud canopy. High above, faint but clear against the bruised orange gloaming churning volcanic filth, inferno flash broader conflict piercing through. The distinct navigation lights of a banking Valkyrie assault transport, growing swiftly brighter, lower, the whine of its engines becoming a rising shriek competing successfully macro artillery battle dimming over the screams surrounding theater sound now, gives way hard reality helicopter vehicles safety gravity. Help was weaving towards the anvil point becoming defined opening ramp, glimmering interior light, reflected troopers unfurling metallic cord ordering attention. Clearly extraction, immediate chaos simmered reflexive relief, swiftly constrained reflected Cast peripherally, is turned away helping hoist broken-legged man safely onto stretcher Aeldar, supporting lead prompt distribute sparse field rations water canteens woman, clutching child tightly climbing aboard last Valkyrie held glide stabilization. Sensitive hovering rear loading ramp, inch clearance concrete, blast damage boot scrapes, deafening proximity assault, engines intake, howled swallowing woman, child suddenly backlit ramp, closing sequence hydraulic whine, drowning desperate sobs, survivor sounds, closing above Cast kneeling with bouncing equipment, respectful ducking main, cannons firing intense downdraft, totemic debris updraft, hellishly lifts designated extraction target, ascending firing thrust vector towards imperial rear consolidation. Blazing angry orange bloom traces contrails left behind nearly emptied ruins site unguarded Cast. gathered his squad. Darker Ways push mission. Objective with methodical efficiency, essential. Reportable action, immersion necessary, steadfast, grim resolve. Infused every step, molecular level, deeper refinery heart, becoming densely compacted, twisted machinery layers. Amidst conflicting noises, tank shells, Titan Southwest, sting, acrid, atmosphere, tasted charcoal, grit, tongue, utter saturation journey. Continued alleyways, forged, collapsed, thermal ducts, fallen ventilation, screens, structure bulk, powerful hollow echoes, transparent centuries, devastation, man-made canyon, flanking partially collapsed hab towers, higher vantage point, shell crater, abrupt crumble foundations like plague teeth, clinger fragment structures, battered hab tower backbone skewed lean, grotesquely higher rents, torn ferrocrete remain relatively intact, overlook, commanded view, refinery battered, smoldering, eastern flank, sporadic guns. Exchanging tracer, flex optical illusions, sharp hand signal ascent, begun met tested footing, feeling out handholds, exposed rebars, bent grotesquely sculptured steps, jagged permacrete halting, gravity pull, diverse bodies, scaled moving agility, honed stealth hunting beasts, bare rock spire predator surveying prey, final rooftop scan horizon, flattened himself, catastrophe, spread panoramic, below chaos breeding, structured formations, impossible discernible pattern, armor typifying greenskin warfare. Boiling like maggots, inflicted corpse beneath crude standards, glyphs, thickly covered, biomass screaming, violent ritualistic pulses, toward sturdily defended central sector crusher wave, behind towering warboss arrangements, visible monstrous figures, flamboyantly armored cleavers, dripping freshly rent matter, large forms, bellowing orders, oscillate horde directions, unclear, manifestly undisciplined, frantic claw purchase ground munitions, stockpile amongst plunging barricades, tires refuse temporary. Stopping structured imperial formations, unfolding tactical envelopment, advanced leaders, bosses visible control, exerted chaos, embraced cellular level brutal organization, forces mass around. If those leaders core crumbling artery severed immediacy, brought crucial collapse, vulnerable disruption, chain reaction, tactical consequence, certainty cast, lowered magnocular lifting, dust smeared lenses, exchanging glance, Sergeant Drek kneeling, beside him equally silent, evaluating brutality, spread below mapping course action, uncompromising urgency, etched permanently features, withholding spoken word, unnecessary mental synchrony, long campaigns, forged understanding, perfectly cold calculating. Killers anticipating kill flow impacts, instantaneously assessed targets, prioritized vitals, conservation, ammunition, economic emotion, expended tread grim path, achieved triumph, painted despair, exchange complete mutual respect, flicking earth cape, settling against rising wind stirred dust devils, below signaled readiness defeat, defined being marked extermination, imminent nails, fate, driven purposefully cold decisive intent, sharpened blade shadow, ready haunted fading Valkyrie lights, specter witnessing. Salvation summoned duty, violent imperative pursuit, galaxy, torn destruction, winning fleeting moment, held memory, close burn, enduring fortress mind sensation, knives, scrape rust, freeing jammed mechanism, obey commands without compromise, awaiting silent word, unleash final calibrated mercy, fury war, forge purpose, one facet, many faces, darkness, endured faithful servant imperium, unto forsaken death carrying world burden, ultimate action, regarding infinite cosmos, small footprints, temporary. To be erased, inevitably tied species, eternal conflict, inevitable darkness, cease fighting, reason, righteous existence, pointless struggle, divine purpose, engineering soldiers, hardened extension, become replaceable, indifferent order itself, logic fighting them, genocide. The snapped order echoed in the narrow space of broken stone and shattered plascrete, barely audible as Cast's finger settled on the rifle trigger. The cool, familiar weight of the longlaws heavy across his folds of his fatigues as it rested stable on the jagged ledge. Already sighting through the Magnac scope's unforgiving lens, the world compressed to emerald shapes moving in the chaos far below, he watched them bellow and shove amongst the refinery debris. Drek's command was a crackle of focused lethality. Pick your targets, aim for the leaders. A microsecond was all it took, aligning reticle on the thick neck cord of a hulking knob boy, roaring orders, synapses firing like glass beams themselves. Exhale, touch. The discharge was a sharp crack, a physical jolt absorbed into Cast's shoulder, and a blinding red-hot lance spat, invisible almost in the lingering smoke, punching clean through the orc's heavy skull. The massive greenskin simply ceased, mid-shout, collapsing like a felled grox. Utter silence seized the horde below, a pause thick with incomprehensible shock before the next sniper shot tore through the stasis, another leader crumpling instantly. The ensuing orc howl was seismic, a wave of bestial rage that shook dust from their perch. Crude sluggers roared, sending ragged fusillades of wildly inaccurate fire spitting harmlessly into the skeletal ruins, as panicked greenskins scanned the rubble for an enemy that remained unseen phantoms. Cast cycled his next round, cool as camacream, optic sweeping. He isolated it instantly, an orc knob captain, bulk further amplified by crude iron plates, swinging a hammer the size of a man, veins bulging as he tried to impose order on the dissolving mob. Cast felt the trigger's smooth resistance, his own vital functions dialed down to near zero. Shot placement, pure math against rage's heat. The last bolt burned through sinew and bone like promesium through parchment. The captain whipped backwards, impact lifting it off its clawed feet for a sickening heartbeat before gravity reclaimed it, silent despite its vanished ferocity. Now pure bedlam took them. Panic overrode the faint echoes of discipline, the leaderless greenskins turning cannibalistic, shoving, snarling, tearing at each other, splitting into terrified, flailing knots of fang and fury, cohesion shattered like the rockcrete under the imperial Buthiel surging from below. The guardsmen pressed the sudden vacuum with relentless brutality. Sharp cracks of las rifles became a continuous staccato thunder masking individual shots, while frag grenades soared in deadly arcs, detonating amidst confusion with concussive whumps that kicked up gore-slick dust clouds. Heavy stubbers began their jackhammer chorus, chainsaw barks tearing across the battlefield, streams of heavy caliber slugs chewing apart disoriented orcs scrambling for cover that didn't exist. Aimed shots from Cast's team continued their grim harvest, each precise lance of light snuffing out any flicker of authority emerging from the chaotic mob, every greenskin that gathered breaths to bellow an order immediately silenced, deepening the lethal fog of confusion choking the Xenos' forces as the Imperial Guard tide rolled forward inexorably. Cast crouched low, magnoscope pressed tight, scanning the unfolding victory amidst the ash and ruin. Lemon rust tanks rumbled like primeval gods below, twin-linked bolters hosing streams of death indiscriminately, their main cannons booming with earth-shaking finality, perfectly timed concussions rolling over the landscape like the heartbeat of some apocalyptic war machine. Guardsmen in columns of iron discipline pushed through gaps in the twisted metal carnage, advanced painstakingly methodical, las rifles snapping in ragged volleys, drowned beneath the titanic orchestra of imperial retribution. The orcs were broken, teetering. Most leaders were so much cooling sludge, their pathetic scrap fortifications dissolving like sandcastles under the sustained, relentless pressure. Hope, however, is the last refuge of the doomed. Pockets of vicious resistance dug in like ticks in ruined habs, lurked in collapsed coolant ducts, waited to spring with crude blades from shadowed bolt holes defiance in rattling breaths and yellow eyes gleaming with undiminished, stupid hate. The abrupt crackpop of his vox bead drove the observation from his skull like a cull's rifle butt. Cast, move down, find us a way in, need a flank for second platoon. Now, Drek's voice was stripped wire. Cast didn't hesitate. Acknowledged, moving now. He thumbed the vox off at his throat, the practiced motions unfolding without conscious thought. Longlas slung tight across his worn camo vest, the reassuring weight settling. Metal mesh grip of his fighting knife slick against his palm, stub pistol drawn and held low. A sharp, silent hand signal held his squad back eyes met. Nods exchanged, then he became shadow, slipping backwards into the cavernous, corpse-like belly of the ruined hab block, navigating towards the arterial street level choked with death. The descent through the hab's intestine was treacherous navigation through a graveyard choked with industrial ruin and forgotten agony. Sudden shafts of sickly, smoke-filtered light speared down onto piles of cracked plasteel, ferrocrete shards, and the blackened skeletons of machinery. Stairwells gaped like raw wounds, choked with debris, walls scabbed over with thick layers of carbon scoring, a testament to intense close-quarter slaughter. Tattered strips of propaganda clung like dying leaves, their once-bold proclamations rendered meaningless ghosts beneath thick ochre blankets of settling ash serve the Emperor. Duty is your strength. Fractured black edges, indistinct words buried deep. Every step released gritty clouds, every rustle sounded like an ambush. He moved with the silence of centuritioned instinct, weaving through the wreckage, flesh and cloth mirroring the fractured gray scale of the collapsing stone around him. The battle outside never relented. Basso booms of distant rust cannons reverberated deep within the hab-portioned skeleton, shaking dust-loose cascades of rubble sending motes swirling lazily in the failing light. Elsewhere, an orc warhorn bellowed in defiant, alien cry, answered immediately by the spluttering clatter of a heavy bolter slug spitting retaliatory death. The bottom landing. Cast dropped to a low crouch, scarcely breathing, peering through a massive puncture in the outer wall ripped open by some forgotten artillery strike. The street scene below was abject carnous wrecks of a different scale, a shattered avenue paved with twisted metal corpses and broken meat. The Chimera lay half-crushed beneath the collapsed ferrocrete snarl of an overpass, its once-proud hull blackened, sliced open like tin, treads snapped into tortured angles. Bodies Humageddon and Greenskin lay tangled and contorted amidst the masonry and flakboard debris, frozen in final agony, slick with cooling vidi. Cass scanned the grim tableau, gray eyes methodical. The refinery's eastern flank crawled through the dust days ahead, triggering memory topography maps in his mind. A secondary access point, partially caved-in but guesstimate-workable a vein leading directly to the subsurface maintenance conduits honeycombing beneath the facility. Flank perfection. He thumbed his Vox, pulse steady now. Direct path located, maintenance tunnels, east flank refinery main structure, intact access, I can guide through. A hiss of static, a pause pregnant with battlefield tension that stretched taut before Drek's reply cracked back. Understood, mark the ingress point, fall back, roll in 3 mics. Cass tapped affirmative acknowledgement against the Vox unit casing mentally, already moving, flowing out through the gap, and melting into the deeper shadows beside a partially collapsed slab of reinforced wall onto the open field of debris-strewn death. Keep close to cover, minimize exposure, sharp angles, just another 100 meters of jagged obsidian and jagged steel bulkheads that might offer scant concealment against unwatchful eyes embroiled in ongoing chaos nearby. He was almost across, boots scraping silently furrowed patterns atop crushed plastine crates and loose ballast rock when it snapped the stillness. Near imperceptible shifting of desiccated metal shelving, a gritty slide of rubble, barely a breath issued from direction of a barely perceived mass beneath a UNVAC carrier wreck, compressed into the tortured geometry between carbonized habunate remains and a fallen beam lattice altogether, looking utterly static until it wasn't anymore. Cast froze instantly, statuesque still how marble imposes on decaying earth, every fiber coiled tighter than a plasma spring under pressure. Senses screamed yell to the red line direction pinpointed, just beyond the deformed wreck of what was once a bulk cargo hauler, disintegrated under a hellacious impact, collapsed beneath collapsed roof struts and shattered brickwork walls, an unintended cairn. He slid step by impossible step towards it, knife leading under his pistol grip, instinctively unison raises even as the danger screamed across his implanted neural net. He found it, submerged partially in scorched refuse and twisted rebar skeletons, an orc commando. Charred carapace armor pulverized in places, dulled gray metal, dented to hell and further ruined by shrapnel ribbons like obscene jewelry. Thick green flesh ripped open in ragged gashes, weeping sluggishly crimson-black down its sides and missing chunks, but the jaw the jagged lower half dangled slack. Ruined by a lucky shrapnel slash devastating the throat was grimly impressive to still be conscious, was active vital signs. A heaving slumped mass reddish-black pooled viscous beneath the ruined neck. Bright carrion flies beginning cluster, interested in dramatic spectrum of distant explosions. The eyes hooded, red embers reflecting the cracked skyline, suddenly flared to violent awareness in the gloomed shadow. Cass took the steadying pull of stagnant air tasting acidic ash, an aquila forbid damp coppery tang, mixed in one stride purposeful step forwards, drawing the mono-edged blade clean and silent point, leveled unerringly toward the motionless green skull, to finally sever spinal plexus connection life signature registering, nil until impossible happens, flash viper strike. Muscular rect arm previously slackened snapped upwards with explosive brutal speed, jagged metal-edged gauntlet closing vice-like precise, locking crushing agony, exploding through cast suddenly his wrist bone grinding under impossible pressure. Laughing, run suicide, instinct overrode pain, burned primal electrolytic floods his nervous network simultaneously crashing thud became crashing hell, as the commando rage-yanked him off balance violently downwards onto himself. Cast twisted muscle-pop reflex instance after feeling claws slash hairs past his carotid another mind's nanosecond avoidance, even as the free monstrous fist pistoned monstrously into his ribs, with the sound cracking in his own ears. Pain was rending tearing electric fire, unraveling his lungs, forcing spray acrid bile vapor from his mouth. Shockwave slammed him back, disconnected boots, left ground, impacting with shattering suddenness, sending blinding white electrical shock traced agony splintered deeper through his side, bruising organ sacs like grapes beneath steel boot heel. Lungs refused. Hacked gasped for air standing amidst rubble knives, twisting cruelly through lungs vision tunnel, streaked gray and smears of lurid green light energies, and bleeding red oxygen deprivation haze. Already the greenskin Kragath uncoiling with agonized bellow, stumbling upright, amidst the devastation landing like a small groundquake. Tusks jutted yellowed broken weapons, reflecting the hellish sky above. Guttural roar ripping out from the slack jaw, spraying thick spittle arcs carrying fetid stench unwashed organism, decay tearing cast senses even worse than trauma choking him. Gorlick fingers closed tight wrenching grip, unsling horrendously oversized cleaver bone cruncher, already descending whistling scythe sound kicking whirl of disturbed polluted air. Cast rolled lightning instinct residual training, embedded cerebellic routine pre-programmed evasion, a side of sheer bulk of the strike felt concussive wave, as Xeno blade carved molten rockcrete, ravine mere centimeters from his helmet vulnerable skull, gouging spark showers. He lashed out boot-snapping tempo against the gaping shrapnel-ruptured flank scored earlier already wet sticky red-black poison flowed freely glistening. Orc Commissar reeled shaken choked growl spluttering thick fluids shock, registered briefly recoiling off balance not fatal reaction cascade system yet. Commando Captain Instinct ruthlessly overrode agony pure distilled WGH. Channeled lunge blinding speed uncanny for such ruined flesh lifting the bluff. Massive spectral cleaved knife sweeping crescent-wide slash, aimed cockily decapitating slash cutting trajectory, calculated too wide aimed thought kill territory. Cast went low. His screaming rim of alien steel milliseconds above his scalp lifting dust, imprinting ozone trail. Pivoting fractionally minute from the balance point, channeling impact momentum, driving elbow spike first precisely back hitting impact crushing forcing into precisely, the already grievous shrapnel rip pulpy wound combo burst. High-pitched bellow pain fury anguish split the air explosive force, tearing from ruptured green lungs, hacked, violently cascading green ichor pus torn muscle fibers tearing. Commando Grunt staggered backwards like drunk defiance collapsing step, revealing vital zone, cleared beastly momentum compromised belly left, momentarily unguarded vital points alone and helpless. Cast did not hesitate catalyzing body leading training knives, crystallizing body perfect alignment. Monotip blade biting upwards, flashlight glinting sprawled flare shell significance, caught peripheral sight blade, drilling through hardened xenoskin legion, forged muscle layers, unguarded fleshy territory swimming lubrication, fluids Lysurgeon implanted diagrams, vivid perfect strike placement towards xenopulmonary sac below pilot seat. Gliding though mesh sinew barrier, clamped organ meeting resistance, push intrinsic penetration. Ironhard keratin pleated skin, gave shattering sound destroyed matters within sudden terrible convulsive. Thunk noise final massive shoulder muscles, slackening melted wiring, slacken routing life signs, abruptly shutting blind sob involuntary gasp, wet tearing sound internal mechanism, ruined silken death side commando, sagged earth collapsing bonelessly atop him hot suffocating bulk, crushing wounded ribs lancing fresh agony lightning crossing, exploded nerve endings before rolling aside crushed across. Untouched alleyway rockcrete drains quiet. Cast didn't move, thought locked onto high alert, still coiled around more beasties, perhaps exploding adrenaline coursing through tunnel-visioned arteries, heaving shuddering gasps, scraping raw fire with every painful pressured suck breath lungs, bruised horrifically burned scraped agony muscles screaming bruise inflicted. Earringing slash distant sounds muffled overwhelmed by amplified tinnitus hammering heartbeat drum. Slowed, 15-20 seconds. Armored form trembling imperceptibly from turbulent hormonal cascade, collapsing now survivors' instincts recognizing in threat lowering guards slightly drawing heavy breaths, past clenched teeth tasting contaminated air, mixed own saliva and metallic tang occulting vision dark red slowly lapsing. Slow movement then unfrozen glacially action, drove wrist wiping knife staining blade on already grievously stained xeno carapace, sheathing sharply with awkward stiff pull. Movement registered grief transmitting sharp agony needle lungs burning, bruised nerve pathways screaming. He keyed the Vox hand steady astonishingly stable his gravel voice sounding strained compressed tight washboard, but carrying through clear unwavering breathing issue stern dollar ingress route, secured moving rendezvous comms, closed static thin noise drex near instantaneous clipping tight regimental gruff, clipped through speaker bordered edges amusement hiding relief, definitely tracked heavy beads raise slash damage report biotic readouts, excised killer instinct might even be grin forced cast rubbed press. Kidney region knife feeling bruised to utter core exhaustion, staining everything Drek channel clear bionic amusement, dry kill confirm monotone. You sound like exterminated humble toaster screamer cast. That allowed faint lizard smirk tugged corner cast blood-caked lip, anticipating chaotic squall landing hot, mess exhauster pause, slowly gathered himself painfully leveraging grabbed cresting chassis work, began moving ghost through smoke haze back destination. Carnage grew denser fractures squads, surged forward towards thrust zone grim final push. Moving towards forefront strike zone atmosphere, physically changed air thickening smell mix carnage, burn metal congealed blood prometheum boils, bitter mineral equal parts char tissue heavy percussion journey, intensified exponentially crushing vibrancy sensed finite, through boot soles ferrocrete slabs, shifting seismic under immense weight shockwaves imperial vengeance piston hands earth, crumpling ruins, further down unseen trajectories, gravity weaponry sculpting reshaping violation streets forever. In skies arching broad vault black clouds, shredded incandescent gashes, incoming barrages furious red lines, tearing swathes light gravity rockets contrails, scarring heaven's heavenly descent, slated doomed target points Skippo's theory shutting entire grids raining white phosphorus self-correcting mercury shells, flying screaming thunder, applause basilisk orchestras hell-tuned pitch long-distance Evan Paris vocalizations, suspending responsorial detonation shock melodies echoing felt bone marrow. From great gaping wounds cityscape foundation, stone shattered ferrocrete tombs, lemon rust tanks crawled voracious forward eye slits Twimbolter machined efficiency, starved barked fiery streams emptying drum magazines indiscriminately chewing composition, curtains metallic debris obscuring Xeno's ragged movement, attempted security positions before main cannons coughed planet cracking reality shifts, coordinating point within 100 meters, everything danced syncopated savage rhythm vibrating. Everything solid foundations, nothing could resist this penetrating fist, grinding relentless unstoppable destiny, pulsing orbital strikes, penetrating crust ground tanks, bellow unity, fired cataclysmic chant, return fire imperial operators, advanced Hirin columns guards platoons, crawled broken avenues Laws rifles, snapping whip sting cords supported layers prologue, respond storm false forward rattled screams gruff commands, vanished water engulfed crescendo noise obliteration, engulfed senses. From catastrophic vibration, artillery fuel detonations, ripe succulent bursting orc positions, structural integrity iron vaporizing panorama endless Xenos death whales, loose harmony imperial helm dement, deep bass relentless inexorable war machine, shrugging insignificant grenade pole walls, collapsed physically possible to existed anymore insane conflict rendezvous, with squad provided fleeting recollection, amidst crippling noise Drek close squad slicing hand signals. Understood positions air singeing proximity, closed deadly theater cast, invisible thread Drek squad, traversing shadows perpendicular, collapsed refinery structures, frameworks intestines incarnadine gore streaks, wall-hanging corpses, draped extravagantly gain entry huge smoke-belching chimneys, crumpled like sog tubes twisted walkways, knotted impossible pretzels, impression of room surfaces reality, broken kaleidoscope shards, feedback loop risk vantage corridors, smelled overpowering mix burned. Oil rock turned vapor human refuse green skin ammonia, undertones biological weapon potency, mingled relentless artillery smoke, stinging eyes dust coats, inside out gradually refracting light dust, particulate suspended sunset turning point last desperate barricade Xenos defense threads, frayed scarcely coordinated now suddenly turned dark branching corridor, partially intact fuel depot subterranean level shadows, pooling thickest unreachable sunlight, pair orc centripost boys appeared. Silhouettes careless posture sluggers, loosely slung backs, dangling roughhide straps, voices grumbling distinctive guttural clicks, anticipating glorious charge ignorance bliss total, regarding swish silent approach ghosts patrolling past thresholds only inches sound, matter resultant no hesitation cast signal Drek concise, sharply even brutal linguist script, field two fingers punch air symbol Kambilok descent, crushing blow eliminate confirmed Drek, moved swiper crafted assassin synchronized so. Detailed rifle stock slid cheek reference pleasure perfection, settling trigger tension, ear hardly registering discharge, thrum tiny signature rod ruby light pierced gloom fog slit, air perfectly unerring ultimate targeting architecture carcass, physically impacted silent implosion within milliseconds victim, collapsed ruined puppet limbs tangled need ammunition, belt immediately after second orc, began head pivot slowing degrees green neuronal network, sluggishly processing threat rear dead comrade. Already collapsing stiffness taking over primitive fighting grip, closing around weapon sling gesture, taking shape confusion registered panic coiled spring, as cast fired simultaneous step forwards, projection miserable intent, cutting flank shadows rifle barrel captured flicker inferno horizon, reflected glare turning momentary target, indicator perfect eliminating flash laser imperative rights, causing head snap phenom spinal cord flash freed surprised curl death, spasmed forward bowels loose. Flattened crumpling onto engine block, glowing ruin clear alert, declared voice-sliced minimal word modules knife thrust command ladder advance engines, accelerating velocity skittering immediate close formation, surrounded ruptured architecture peeling walls last pistol emerging, recalled routine aimed momentary threat charging corpse painted green thicken abhorrent close knife arm wrestle unnecessary, enclose obelisk armor crashing loud splash vial fluid streaming cast scanned, continuing push optimal. Baneblade arrival subtly crucial signal alterations, began felt different body resonating, differently heavier tremors, resonant frequency lower, not explosives warheads, not nearby Russ impacts, immeasurably huge force tank treads, grinding megatonnage inexorable momentum, approaching lethal simplicity geological forces activated pressing immense weight structural stability down beyond physics, sheer mass crushes supporting rock walkways, under rare suddenly collapsing sections notice. Scattered orcs outright abandoning positions, terror recognizing Ubergeist's signature vibrations, emanating primordial fear, instantaneously cast twisted perspective north Long Avenue smoke, strobing preceded titanic shape, emerging fog war entity manifest Bane blade rolled existence metaphysics, rewrote on escalator impossible aspect beyond heavy tank beyond Titan class, moving fixed structure fortress adamantium hills, long cruel angularity predatory refusal to accept reality. Limitations spitting venom streams, heavy bolters, winked sparking cylindrical barrels, faster eye-blink sweeps, completed armor-piercing incendiary magic vaporizing defensive positions, pathetic matchstick concerts, dismantled emplacements like cardboard impugn venerable giants, bootstrap assembly line construction, obliterated defense mindset, utterly primary cannons, swiveled ponderous creaked hydraulic inevitability, fixed leveled defiance funnel refinery core, focus systemic hatred. Generator field revealed objective operational momentous significance frequency, spike consuming urgently precise symbol clearance imperative impelling unconditional obedience, breach route completion, scout snapped advance lastfire header, gateway sniper shots carving through last confused greenskin coherence, retreating forming new barricade chicken wire determination, last stand intermittent covering fire cast steel vaulted rust choked pipe bundle, rotating firing pistol shots impacting. Center mass shear velocity charge greenskin torso, turn stumble vaporized wink popping, flooding acidic fluids knife levered ventral fist strike, deep shattering grip intestine splashed fractured bone, create scream choked annihilated impactrum muted event, insignificant background thunder suddenly energy shifted atmosphere, imploding sucked ions vortex tunnel, vacuum collapsed reality focus point baneblade main, cannon point blank fired roar beyond thunder beyond sound felt chemical. Shift reality cracked wide open massive rounds cavernous demolitionist shell, size plow team fired perfect impact point center mass greenskin stronghold bulwark characteristics, exploded instantly evaporations billion heat orbital kinetic combustion elementary particles, vaporized ceiling, collapsing massive chunks rained impossible hellfire promethium chemical blaze, motivating continued advance passage plan route, engineered clear sear eyeballs, surface rock glowed white hot cracks magma. Foundations running downwards through backbone of something ancient and broken waiting beneath the city's shell hole of recrimination. Established entirely burning slag remained whole geography, deep swallowing any lingering doubts victory possibility profound unstoppable showcased, merely few witnesses understood gravity stripping defenses, nature symbolic heavyweight champion declaring bye-bye contender, counted severance, arrived pinnacle perfect operational climax orchestration, however orc prophecy demanded. Grand final spectacle pitiful, lacking insufficient desecrated battlefield, suddenly source immense cacophony boomed, shattering every optical logic lens torn ragged fragments, shifting architecture heart Grimhold Fisher, itself tore open towering monstrosity, surged onto stage gestalt riddled greenskin war boss incarnate, amplified grotesque parody life, enormous scales, thick meshed hellplate, iron bones, metallic reinforcement, crude surgery wires, bulbous green, corded lumpen muscle landscape. Vastness cage holding meat mobile jagged iron jaw, reflected back crimson strobe, light their advance conflicting energies, madness, flickering crazily painting jagged irregular illumination, flashes across insane chromatic biocannon, crackling crude energized power field gloves, signal physical murder unit presence, stomped earth shattering tectonic plate adjustment, deafening unearthly roar feeling lungs cavities, shake releasing tormented rage thunder echoing ripple awesome bestial physicality, direct challenge. Flung towards imperial apotheosis, instantaneously greenskins faltering stampede freeze, rally beachhead, divine spirit rose shrieking defiance throwing themselves suicide charge, renewed fury climatic immortal hubris warrior psychosis, hurl spears lighting lightning, impossible deity carpet crushed treads instantly reaction, delay calculated negligible optics registered calibrated assessment, confirmed threat profile instantaneously lemon Russ, adjacent fired secondary shell armor piercing secondary. Daka throne deputized will Lord Baneblade's coiled spring loaded gun barrel swung fraction degree infinitesimal weighting target acquisition, locked perfect green engine plant malice designate shoot execution, sent its reply. Cannons fired thunderous unity declaration calling end times echoed history books reality, collapsing iron avatar spitting hell downward trajectory, carved straight path core wretched xeno oppressor wind screamed vacuum charge combustion flash insert harpoon shell detonation catastrophic energy instantive vaporizing detonation crater forming instantaneously 8 meters wide lava pool scrap metal divine retribution administered whatever remained warboss ceased existence meaningless vapor patch. Smoking slag crater newly excavated floor memorial accomplish flameless cremation justice finale made manifest greenskin faces collective screwed fear absolute shock vacuous panic terror dilated yellow eyes unending shrieks rage choked silence collective madness torn away suddenly leaderless structure mindless mob empty glass shattered mirror unity dissolved filth individual clusters despair beginning disentangle lose fighting formation instant losing spirit animate shells avoiding obvious doom. I fleet scatter spider drunk run frenzied panic pursued les fire crackling sparks dancing fury eagerness suddenly leaderless prey tripping scrambling away fight lost suddenly all bound stupid hope, vanished imperial steel speed, surged pursue exploit demolish escapees, systematically slaughtered concentrated points slaughter pens, created ensure exterminatus packed victory battlefield, simmered unleashed wrath, devices rhythm shifts, psi counterpoint ringing ear drum ruins, consuming peaceful knot. Tumbleweed silence eerie backdrop, scattered burning promethium conduits casting flaring orange malevolent glow sweet chemical tang, replacing discord stench, defeat leak pores, remaining stonework surrounding snipers, nest conversely breeze, existed remain motionless fatigue mechanics, grind joints metal bumper burns, overtaxed tendons, trembling ever so slightly exhaustion core, deep-seated profound cast, gashed deliberation step, forward implement, survey cost, examine land soul, deep well. Preservative energies drain nearly invisible reserve drawing bottom, last dregs twin agonies war torn form metal stench blood, scorched earth dirty palm close swipe clearing coagulation, slither corroded breastplate imperial eagle barely seen under grime layers. He stood boots crunched horrifically mixed gravel degraded ossified paste horror stew walk ragged unwanted prince failure, perhaps simpler victory tasted dust weight dragged chain emotions, like cold ancient iron anchors pulling soul. Salted seabed walk continued landmark pillars detritus conquest, flaking catharsis impossible fraying guardsman thoughts flickered like dying power cell crown imperial certainties, settled grit embedded fleshy cracks beneath fingernails. Battle over, orcs broken, refinery imperial salvage scrap, perhaps spirit intact grimhold rift pulverized husk remains cast, kept walking crunch sounds impure testament demanding witness. The snapped command echoed curt in the tight confines of shattered rockcrete, cast settling into his worn vantage like the dust motes swirling around him, the unforgiving weight of the longless solid, familiar, true, resting perfectly balanced upon the jagged lip of a collapsed balcony facade, already sighted in through the magnoscope's monochrome world, the harsh light below washing the orc horde scrambling amidst refinery carcasses into sharp relief, military discipline overriding primal instinct. Drek's voice crackled flat laconic poison over Vox, pick your targets, aim for the leaders. A breath held reticle settling slick on the thick, straining neckcord of a massive knob boy astride wreckage, bellowing challenge, synapse firing cold fair judgment faster than conscious thought could form it. Exhale, touch, execute. The near-silent crack jolted his shoulder eating recoil as the blinding white-hot energy leapt, a searing lance dissolving almost instantly against the smoke-filtered backdrop, punching with finality through dense skull bone. The huge greenskin dropped mid-roar, a collapsing wall of muscle and subterranean filth. Utter stillness seized the orc mob, primal minds struggling against the impossible, frozen in shock before the second sniper shot echoed the silence's death knell, another leader vanishing into meaty pulp. The answering howl shook dust from Cast's perch, a landslide of feral outrage. Crude sluggers roared in ragged unison, kicking up sprays of rock dust and sparks against ruins, suddenly terrifyingly empty of visible enemies. Cast racked the charging handle, cool precision humming in his blood, scope traversing. Target acquired instantly an orc knob captain, crude iron plate augmentation bulkier than a chimera tread block, swinging a 400-pound hammer like a child's toy, veins strangled, cords straining against skull plate as he tried shouting down the rising panic. Cast felt the trigger's arcane compression beneath fingertip flesh lines, breathing suspended then stopped. The last impact burned through sinew neck meat and titanium reinforced spine like promethium scalpel through corpse starch cellophane. The massive greenskin visibly lifted wholesale, off torn boot cloven feet fractionally backwards, awkward vulnerability held frozen for one ludicrous second, before crashing face first into spreading tarmac pools of its fading kin. Panic devoured discipline whole. Left unguided, the orc mass detonated into snarling beasts, shoving, clawing at brothers, tearing into confused knots of tooth and claw fear, cohesion shattered, units dissolving like yesterday's wet pigment spills staining battlefield under relentless Imperial Guard hammer blow surging unrestrained coreward now. Guardsmen pressed the sudden gap with ruthless geometry, the rapid cracks of massed LZ rifles transformed into thunder, without discernible pause masking individual shots. Frag grenades sailed in poisonous arcs detonating amidst frantic confusion, with stump-and-furling whumps saturating compressed nerve pathways with agony. Heavy stubbers unleashed their chainsaw salvos, infernal brass ring tearing through dislocated greenskins scrambling blind through fog, all but unconscious to coherent war planning. Cast's team exterminated emergent faction leaders with idade-cicaded ritual precision, every predatory lance beam amplifying desperate fear into fatalistic disorder, the Imperial Guard war machine, advancing irrevocably exposed Xenos fracture lines, entire cast hunkered lower. Magnoscope fused to eye socket scanning the contested zone below amidst drifting smoke canopy. that tasted like broken planets, fallout ash, bloodic rust, clanking godmetal ghosts, shaking reality itself, with engine roar gnashing track symphony visible. Beneath them, Knott's guardsmen exploiting damage wearing disciplined, storm array laws snap chords, swallowed utterly by the Majorsk boom's imperial artillery reconsecration. Lemon rust front cannons trumpeting eternal war, modern reef squashed corpses beneath. Vengeance thirst flawless progress ruin horizon greenskins, faltering clearly reactions, slowed command, barely sparked majority leadership compost pile, fertilizing smoked crater corpse moonscape. But resistance it remained virus core dug into collapsed habshells, buried tunnel complexes, lurking coolant pipe netherworld ready spring blade smear, shadows unpredictable oily tide surges, as monuments expire cast himself snapped crabbing attention impact. His Voxlink activated incendiary Drex sandpaper flat command compression, demanding not query exhausting all queries cast, snapped neurological acknowledgement, acknowledged moving now. As vital motions triggered autonomous actions, ripping longless strap sliding diagonally across damp trenchcoat back weld, seam locking strap fumble absent conscious mind drawing knuckle duster grip monoknife, defined purpose tactile affirmation, confirming blade configuration, chambering bolt pistol slide chamber check. Deaf to sound rehearsed combat drill cannon perfection, unspoken signal diced hands scissering invisible order proximity explicit freeze actions, initiate alpha group, coalesce momentarily planet static cast, ghosted already backwards, swallowed absolute darkness, disemboweled hab block throat, descending step by tension cold step towards arterial pumping, waist rupture. Sent within the hab's rotted corpse offered navigation trial purgatory shifting skeletal shot. Blackened bones, detritus piled ossuary titanic shattered machinery, gleaming, oblivion helpless sudden shafts, breath corpse gaslight weaponized visual cuts, litter mess scorched black pseudoskeletal steps, choked evacuation rubble walls tattooed thick cigarette tar patterning smoke damage pluriform propaganda shavings, pathetic cling moisture peeling, pitiful scattered whispers faded beneath drifts pumice. Dust imperial gothic pronouncements, duty strength emperor salvation splintering letters crumbling propaganda edge elegance, consigned incredible neglect crew or specimen degeneration, coating surfaces industrial brute neglect decades, quiet dust layers year straight of formation, every footfall triggered minute plumes ash crystals dancing suspended thickened air, the greater convolution dynamic sounds magma heart, thunder outside persistent lemon rust howls gossip, earthquake strong possibility. Crumbling foundations life sign detected instrument sensor spike warp density, anomaly tremble suddenly actual exterior communicate, localized orc warhorn blast signature biological vibrating intensity, raw followed ragbag, auto response heavy bolter solid rapid fire arpic Gibson percussion dissonance C hash major low violent signature, achieved bottom landing dusts and crunched packed snow friction grip knife tighter pistol reflex steel, poised crouched sliced external wall visualize. Street vista crater vision, sculpted Sudara bright city times road resembled accidental landfill, improvised graveyard level height, twisted metal cadavers fermentation, compost lady casualty twisted bone clad grand testament, broken husk partially buried beneath collapsed road tier skeletal carcasses, chimera reminiscent cybernetic horror victim, half digested metallic limb damage treads, snap drive open carcass furnace glow past gloaming significant biology litter, fused twisted. Both species consign novel bioscape grief recombination, silence actual acoustics, palpable hastily survey scanning refinery mantellect eastern, stone flanks discernible ruin matrix, debrascope semitunnel access possibility, ruin memory grids overlaying network subsurface arterial ducts maintenance artery bypass security direct ingress underground passages, perfect knife strike signaling hand stabbed vox occluded, direct path located maintenance tunnels east flank. Refinery access intact guide readiness, static stasis pregnant battlefield, compressed thin reveal breather minutes measured direct, clump deadpan, understood mark ingress fall back move in 3 minutes, thought process instinct shift coil potential dangers obeyed well-ingrained interior landscape sharpened honed beyond distraction, skidded slipped cracked wall aperture, submerged deeper gloom rubble channel low foundation, sludge progress slower shadows, thickening clinging advancing foot, steady crunch solid. Cadence barely holding chaos commotion, gates raw nerve junctions, thumping louder perception, twitched hairline signals, screamed pause. Beyond wreck bulk hauler rust cancer noticed temperature extraneous noise irrelevant frozen potential hazard engagement stance gliding sepulcher anticipation knife leading wind chill sliced corrosion whether inspiration ambient discovered lying scarcely breathing trapped beneath legacy junk accidental cairn awful cooked metal junk commando greenskin armor pierced torn shrapnel craters weeping vital heat viscous carpet word ruined lower jaw casual threadbare lifeless gaping cavern lazily pooling pathological crimson surprising spark recognition visor slits beady redness pulsing life embers dying universe cast centering pulling long refocus breathing pattern cleansing dark promise step Forward blade ready passage instance. Flashed imminent silent recon. Practice rituals approximation. 1 swift impact assignment. Complete spindle sequence physiological threat. Overriding intelligence vicious spring. Attack reflexive extremity. Destroyed augmented gauntlet impact. Welded knuckle cast. Wrist bone crushing vice. Snap pressure wave comorbidity. Gasped pain tornado nerve endings. Flaring XK scale combustion ripping reflex defense wrenched insane troll force. Dragged face first gaping ape jaw fang pustules breathing ripe decay wolful teeth. Stained yellowed menace simultaneously. Free knucklehouse limb piston blow scything claws casual lethal curve. Avoided millimeters conceivable physics miracle diverted cutting arc. Barely nipped helmet Kevlar shell spine tingled blade impact plate. Concrete gouge centimeter deep beyond footsole crushing black void. Swept conscious universe punched ribcage. Evaporated air collapsed lungs shutterboom hitting pavement. Agony impacted reality. Dissolved constellations assault pure nerve kicked cider screaming oxygen desert laughter choking darkness. Filled vision volcanic exposed commando staggered replied overwhelming surprise grunted surprise jolted major wound tearing gap soaked armor stagger recovery unsure defiance surged furious explode. Motion faster physics expected animatronic wraith possession carnage blade descent blur impossible cast atomic split divorced height instinct dropped fulcrum swept elbow rock bottom trauma impact savage slam crushed organ wound deepened commando bellowed green agony impossibly leaning unbalanced knife opening vital blind spot eternity flashed intuition leaping knife precision slither sank to hilt parting fibrous muscle twang synapse snapped body automatic collapse deadweight crush cast dragged freedom shuddering gasps scrap agony racked ribs echoes blow lingering poisoning movements froze seconds trembling swallowed breaths leaking fire bronchioles slowly meticulously wiped sticky blade metallic gleam xeno rags sheath clean blood clog invisible particles thumb vox initiate path confirmed clear moving RNDZ back weary knocking timbre stopped finally recording static filter drex acid tone whispering reality consequences fittingly amused triggered recall planet Bob moved thickets deflection grind way home poster imago victorious maw consumed genuine dark laughter audible list steam killing ground murders domain intensified seismic patterns deeper orchestral arrangements shaking strumming baneblade reality fracture tread patterns widest scraping gore roller approaching herald phenomenology metal giga present nothing comparable adamantium brute mass spitting fire trails infinity fort palace turrets rotating wider hydra plunges flaming heavy bolter walls spraying robes dance macabre rope dancing reaper door guardian ensuring necessary clearance voximal troopers hissed orders advancing methodically cast felt bone weary exhaustion predator wound compromised performance edge brought squad junctions assembled assault forward architecture eat inside out degradation maximum towering smoke column ventilation blast furnaces necrotic columns thankful ragdoll effect kernel directive squads implicitly sync torrentially vomiting concentrated firepower avenues momentarily still cast knife sheer reflection bloody solitude 100 meters extraction zone sudden Kraken rows intellect boundary holes massive crude plates welded nobility warbus impossibly huge entity shaking foundation grip massive cleaver challenge hubris emperor titan blessed bane wheels slewed targeted deathcore atomic fire straight struck disappeared sound erase concepts victorious guard shots countless broke orcs wept ran panic focus silence prevailed eventually morphed bleeding landscape cast stood quiet weak journey walk washed agony wreck surrender overtaking just crunched into steps profound terminal fatigue process begun blood smear chest plate wander slowly trash compactor end times bearing scars victory written cost sold world hard translated boots crunch architecture dissolution justice own material planet resource management unit report fatigue victory etc essential vicious war testimony etching bones walking monadic scars live breathe physician memory theater columns of guardsmen moved forwards thunder ominous specificity time conduction persistent retreat disappearing later rear pockets silenced did entire river flow through boiling dead drowned again chemicals burned dead eyes appreciate oxygen lack nearby debris collapsed rooftop adjacent now held post engagement scanner evaluating thermal entities necessary tactical withdrawal completion maintained position star an eagle unrivaled allegiance oath fulfilling achievement worth consumption pain metrics walking wordless thought circuits finalizing autopsy report grimhold refinery victory certified by regulators boots crunching burnt brick dust distinct repetition pattern penetrative auditory percept completely over the acrid odor of burnt promethium hung thick and suffocating a physical weight pressing down on the smoldering wasteland where the battle for the rift gasped its last smoke coiled in dense greasy ropes twisting skyward from gutted hablocks and the hulks of incinerated vehicles the ghostly glow of dying fires flickering fitfully beneath the oppressive black haze that choked the shattered cityscape A wind, hollow and cold, swept across the carnage, carrying the unmistakable, stomach-churning stench of blood, a cloying, persistent copper taste on the tongue layered with the bitter tang of ozone scorched by lasphare, and the deeper, more abiding reek of charred flesh. Hundreds lay sprawled across the cratered streets and shattered plazas, uniforms of the Astra Militarum rendered into scorched black rags, corpses locked in the final, desperate grip on battered lasguns or the rusting bayonets that had failed them. Dust and ash coated every surface like grimy snow, settling on open, unseeing eyes that stared sightlessly at a sky choked with the industrial filth of a dying world. Nearby, a field medic knelt on the blood-soaked rubble, slick red hands pressed futilely against the ruin of a trooper's chest, lips moving in silent, repetitive prayer to the God Emperor, even as the last spark guttered and faded from the soldier's gaze, leaving nothing but chilling vacancy. The survivors, the echoes of the fighting companies, gathered numbly amidst the desolation of their victory. They stood like statues among the fallen, some exchanging murmurs too low to understand, stripped of triumph, others mechanically stripping down their lasguns, cloths scraping on blackened metal, their faces etched with the deep grooves of utter exhaustion and a grief too vast for tears, masks of weathered stone under grime. Cast found Sergeant Drek leaning against a shattered wall of ferrocrete, his carapace armor caked in layers of dried gore and viscous mud, a livid, freshly crusted scar splitting the skin along his jawline. He sucked on a law stick, its ember glowing a dull red in the twilight gloom, his expression completely blank, his eyes fixed on the grim procession shaping silent rows of sheet-covered forms destined for the pyres. Drek's gaze slowly drifted, catching Cast's own, and a minuscule nod passed between them, an entire lexicon of shared loss, weary understanding, and the fragile acknowledgement that they still breathed past in that infinitesimal gesture. Others hadn't, others wouldn't. Cast exhaled, the breath escaping slow and measured, a sound lost beneath the keening wind. Too many battlefields like this one scarred his memory, too many fragile lights snuffed out in fields of mud and steel, too many vacant eyes gazing upwards at heavens that offered no salvation, only indifferent pollution. This desolation, this pervasive stink of death wrapped in the futile trappings of order, this was the immutable price extracted by the eternal war machine, a tithe levied in flesh paid willingly or not, a cycle grinding onward with inhuman indifference. He found Colonel Voss after some time, a stark figure standing sentinel-like at the raw edge of the ruin, silhouetted against the pall of rising smoke. The colonel surveyed the grim tableau stretching towards the tainted horizon, his flak jacket reduced to little more than scorched fiber bundles hanging from his frame, thick boots caked almost beyond recognition in layers of dust, filth, and dried, darkening blood. Yet his posture remained fiercely upright, unyielding, the rigid spine of a man tempered by 100 campaigns etched onto landscapes just as blighted as this, commander, soldier, survivor, and statue intertwined. He turned slightly as Cast neared, his gray eyes, stark and sharp as flint, cutting through the gloom to assess the scout with unnerving intensity. "You did well, Scout," Voss stated, his voice a low gravel rasp. Cast inclined his head a fraction, offering no words, none existed that could bridge the chasm of the moment. Voss rolled his broad shoulders, a gesture heavy with the accumulated burden of months of brutal attrition settling on him anew, a familiar weight settling like lead on weary bone. "The refinery's secured," he announced, the words devoid of inflection, purely functional. "Last of the orc stragglers are being hunted down in the lower tunnels. The rift is ours, again." There was calm in his delivery, an unnerving, practiced cadence, but beneath it, a seamless void where triumph or satisfaction should have echoed. Cast let his own gaze wander across the gruesome landscape. They purchased the bodies being hauled by fatigue-sapped troopers to the waiting pyre stacks, the gray tendrils of vomit smoke clawing upwards into the heavy, poisoned air. Voss pivoted fully to face him now, his expression sealed tighter than an augur's vault. "Rest while you can," he ordered, the command resonating with a strange kind of tired finality. "We leave, within the week." A frown, minute but undeniable, touched Cast's features. "Leave." Voss gave a curt nod, his own gaze sliding away, drawn inexorably towards the jagged silhouette of the low mountains and the vast, ash-choked emptiness of the wastelands beyond the fractured city. "New orders," he stated flatly, the words as cold and impersonal as a date-a-slate readout. "High Command. We're being redeployed." A familiar chill seeped into Cast's core, a freezing sediment settling deep within his gut. He knew it shouldn't surprise him, this ugly inevitability, this gravitational pull of endless conflict. There was always another war waiting, another ghastly theater of destruction yawning open after the latest dropship landing, another tattered banner reddened by another world's blood. Voss took a long, slow breath that seemed to draw the sour air deep into the marrow of him before expelling it just as deliberately. "Does it matter?" The three words hung suspended in the smoke-choked air. thick with a meaning far heavier than their simplicity suggested, a truth as stark and unavoidable as the piles of dead awaiting the torch. Cast remained silent. There was nothing to say. It didn't matter. It never mattered. The war was the only constant, the Imperial Guard its relentless, grinding engine, and they were its cogs, perpetually oiled with blood, destined only to march on until the machinery itself broke down. That night, stripping down the razor edge of life demanded ritual. Cast sat isolated in a pocket of deep shadow beyond the perimeter lamps drawn around what passed for an encampment, sharpening his combat knife. The shhhhhnk rhythm of the whetstone gliding repeatedly, ruthlessly, along the glinting steel was a familiar metronome against the deeper silence, a pocket of solitary, meditative relief mirroring the emptiness within. The blade was already lethally keen, perfectly honed, but the action itself was the sole virtue, an anchor against drifting thought. Past the makeshift wire, colossal pyres roared skyward, pillars of flame licking hungrily at the ash-polluted night, their throats devouring plinths stacked high with the gray, wrapped bundles that had once been the 72nd Nishian rifles, the 10th Bombard Company, troopers with names now erased. The pyres roared, casting vast, dancing shadows that stretched monstrously long across shattered walls and buckled basalt roads, shapes that squirmed and throbbed like tormented spirits. The flames clawed upwards, fierce and blindingly bright, consuming flesh and bone with terrifying speed, incinerating the earthly coils of men who would never again hear muster bells or the cosmic cry of a dropship engine, obliterating companions into soaring embers propelled on the hot drafts, borne towards the utterly indifferent, star-scattered cold of the unfeeling void. Cast watched the consuming orange chaos for a long time, the heat barely detectable at his distance, witnessing the transformation of men into fleeting sparks and then drifting ash. Then wordlessly, without shifting his gaze away from the fire-bright oblivion reflected darkly in his newly sharpened blade, he resumed the smooth, rhythmic scrape. Practice until precision became instinct. Then instinct became survival. Survival until the next deployment. Survival until the next pyre. He rose stiffly from his perch above the rubble, knife sliding home into its sheath with a soft click. Physically drained, emptiness gnawed, a purely mechanical demand demanding servicing. Boots grated on twisted metal debris, and the ubiquitous carpet of spent brass shell casings littering the ground like rotten metal teeth as he made his way towards the low, glow-striplet rectangle that housed the makeshift mess hall, a repurposed warehouse annex where the ragged remnants of the 122nd Effing Recon had gathered around stark trestle tables. Inside, the cloying heat hit immediately, a stagnant fug saturated with sweat, scorched physaline, unwashed bodies, and the faint, sickly undertone of disinfectant. No clamor of victory emerged, no ruddy-cheeked banter nor chorused hymn of survival, just silence. The deep, bone-weary kind of stillness that hangs heavy when the nerves are frayed to snapping, the muscles long past rebellion, the very souls drained to such utter vacancy that even the relief of continued existence is too monumental an emotion to process, leaving only this profound collective exhaustion. Cast took a dented tin tray without speaking, accepting the thick, viscous sludge the color of poisoned dust from the silent cook who dumped a scoop of lukewarm, odorless nutrient paste onto it. He found a vacant corner, isolated from the small knots of silent, blanketed soldiers pushing paste around their own trays or merely staring at the scratched plascrete tabletop before them. The food held no taste, only texture, sticky, gluey blandness coating the tongue. It didn't matter. It was fuel. Shoveling mechanical spoonfuls past lips that barely felt the sensation, he forced the rubbery substance down, each mouthful a bolt tightening somewhere unseen in his gut, overriding the empty roiling beneath his ribs. Sustenance was an unthinking function, a service to the meat machine that carried the battle-scarred mind. Across the compartment, hunched beneath a flickering lumen strip that threw harsh shadows across his scarred face, sat Drek, flanked by two equally silent troopers. Drek methodically ripped apart the fibrous rind of a ration bar, shoving chunks into his mouth, chewing with bovine intensity, swallowing hard. His eyes lifted, meeting Cast's for startling moment across the haze and scarred tables. They held no discernible emotion, not hostility, not camaraderie, only a fathomless exhaustion as deep and impenetrable as the void itself. Then his gaze dropped back to the gray crumbs on his tray. One foot in front of the other carried him towards the chipped plascrete structure, designated simply Barrack 7 Gamma. His movements were slow, deliberate, each step a minor act of will executed through fogged muscle memory until consciousness faded to near null. The makeshift showers were industrial relics grafted onto the buckled outer hull of a bombed-out manufactory wing. Clusters of heavy gauge, rust-pitted pipes thrusting from patchwork holes, leaking valves hissing angrily, pooling condensation bled iron oxide water stains like tears down the walls. Cold water, raw, unfiltered, hammered down from the nozzles with surprising force, the pipes groaning in protest. He stood directly beneath the downpour head bowed, letting the frigid torrent scour him. It bit fiercely into the grime-caked skin of his back and shoulders, the initial shock a deeper agony than most wounds he'd felt that week. He welcomed it. He endured it. Rivulets, instantly ink black with liquefied filth, streamed down his flanks, swirling around his ankles over the patterned steel mesh flooring before vanishing into drains choked almost solid with layers of accumulated mire, corruption stubbornly resistant to any cleansing flood. Old grease, battlefield debris, and the grit of 1,000 ceasefires mingled with the legacy of this latest engagement. Gradually, the Eldar blood that had caked his arms like a second sprayed skin loosened and flushed away, streaks of diluted crimson vanishing into the choked grid. The layers of sour sweat that stiffened his fatigues rinsed off in lather-free streams. Beneath the scouring flood, revealed patch by patch as the tide of filth receded, lay the pale latticework of older scars, older wounds, the permanent signatures of battles claimed by other worlds, other trenches, names and dates blurred by time and constant movement. Silvery ridges and angry puckered furrows covered his ribs, tracked across his flank, a thick roped line of pullid tissue slashing down one thigh. Fingers brushed absently over a rough knot of scar tissue on his left bicep, a close-range last burn from the dust plains of Helzar VII. A starburst of jagged white scar tissue low on his abdomen, fragment damage during the boarding action on Freighter Cyprium's Hope. Each mark a monument to a past deployment, a past victory demanded by throne and chain of command, worlds long since left behind smoldering or frozen in distant memory. That night in the vast drafty cavern designated as the Consolidated Barracks, the air clung thick with pale yellow light from ancient lumen globes spluttering overhead, their feeble illumination doing little but gild the layers of palpable gloom inside and throw long, dancing shadows across the endless rows of simple steel-framed cots. Some bunks were already occupied, their occupants sunk into the profound, vacant abyss devoid even of dreams. Others sat hunched on their thin mattresses, silhouettes moving with stiff determination, cleaning already pristine las rifles down to the molecular level, stitching patches onto threadbare fatigues with fingers numb from cold and fatigue, penning letters on ripped flimsy that would never reach destinations lost to communications breakdown, bureaucratic entanglements, or the simple fact of devastated planetary networks. Cast found his cot, indistinguishable from 1,000 others except for its particular placement along a mildewed wall, and dropped onto the wafer-thin mattress without ceremony, the flimsy canvas yielding instantly under his weight to the unyielding suspension webbing beneath. His body gratefully yielded to the minimal support with the sigh of overstressed sinew finally given leave to cease. He pulled the knife freshly honed, mirror-bright from its protective sheath at his hip. The worn leather sheath hit the cot frame with a soft thump. He turned the cold steel in his hands slowly, deliberately, feeling the perfectly balanced weight, the subtle catch as he ran his thumb, calloused almost to stone, along the hair-sharp edge, testing it again purely for the tactile feedback, the reassurance, the feel of a tool ready for its grim purpose. Satisfied, he set it carefully aside, within that magic reach practiced over decades of sudden alarms and survival reflexes, resting it point down on the flak vest piled wrestled off, and placed atop his duffel at the cot's head, where snapping illumination and a specific rigid frame argument of muscle memory could seize it in absolute darkness. His lasgun sat propped against the uprights, freshly wiped of visible blood and residue, power pack humming faintly with a fully charged reserve, ready for the killing dawn. He lay back, settling into the thin bones of a pillow stuffed with anonymous fiber, his eyes tracing cracks and corrosion patterns on the high-arched roof plating above him, listening to the gaps between shouts in chorus. The low murmuring hum of standby Vox traffic bleeding thin as whispers from the comms room down the far corridor, the scrappy thud of a boot on metal decking, the persistent drip of water leaking unseen onto metal somewhere in the dark guts of the structure, the rustle and shift as men too deeply exhausted for rest shifted on narrow beds seeking impossible comfort, the incessant tattoo of a rhythmic tremor from one exhausted sleeper's finely tuned nerves jangling beyond conscious control. Far off beyond the thick bunker walls and brooding city ruins, the low rhythmic crump of cleansing artillery walk an unmistakable cadence, finishing off pockets of resistance, guaranteeing no greenskinned straggler scratched its way to rebellion during withdrawal. This fight was concluded, paid for, this city forces secured, the victory feasted upon by the pyres. It was over. Yet the grim truth pressed down heavier than the amnesic barracks atmosphere. There would consistently and inevitably be another transport screaming through the atmosphere, another frozen muster drumming panic-struck hearts on nameless embarkation decks, the precise additionally, another scarred battlefield beckoning with its particular brand of horror, tailored uniquely awaiting them, a flame or icy tomb. Another mission docket stamped Imperial priority flashing onto freshly charged data slates mere moments after recovery. Another metropolis reduced to identical landscapes of shattered stone, mangled steel, throwdown rubble, and charnel house vapors. Another night spent staring into suffocating darkness of observation posts constructed from debris, peering into cloying fog or merciless desert emptiness, scanning with aching eyes and grazed nerves for what horrors might emerge come dawn to restart the abattoir's grinding operation with renewed sickening fervor. That was tomorrow's war, tomorrow's corpsepire fuel, tomorrow's fresh scar for the collection. For now, here in this fragile cage of relative silence tangled with critters and torment, worn down beyond sensation, there remained only this one frail possibility: sleep, blankness, the temporary, precious suspension granted to tools maintained just sufficiently functional for the next forced deployment march into the Imperial meat grinder unto the final sacrifice. And tomorrow, inevitably, instructed by alarm klaxons or desiccated command vox, the war would claim them back, marching perpetually onwards over the broken bodies piled mountains high behind them, a horrible monument to their progress measured solely in miles and corpses. When exhausted oblivion coiled its cold fingers around his consciousness, the only weapons ready stood the patiently waiting knife sheathing the implacable edge forged for nothing beyond more killing, the fully charged lasgun humming its silent promise of sanctioned violence, and the endless march.